Very good morning to all, and a very warm welcome for this workshop. My name is Vidya Bhushan. I am a Deputy Director in Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, Mussoorie, and I'm Executive Director for the National Gender and Child Center. It is my privilege to extend a very warm welcome to all of you for this workshop. Uh, if I am audible to you, one of you can simply write in chat box that I am audible. Thank you, Shirini. Thank you, Angelique. And we will straightway start off with the inaugural address by Secretary, Ministry of Women and Child Development in a minute or two from now. And I would be introducing him very briefly, and we will invite him for delivering his inaugural address. And then I will walk you through the program agenda for 2 days of virtual workshop. I'm very happy that all of you could join here. I will also tell you a bit about the National Gender and Child Center and what we are doing here, and would like to say a few things about the couple of very eminent speakers that we have lined up for all of you. We really look forward to a great participation from all of you, and I have put some instructions on the screen with regard to, this is a very large group, so a request would be for all of you to keep your audios and videos on mute. And if you have any questions or comments at any point of time during the conversation, which we would surely would like a participation from all of you. So if you have any comments or questions, you can use the raise hand function on the Zoom, and we will come back to you, and or we'll ask the speakers to come to you to say your things. Also, you can use the chat box for sending comments and questions. Secretary sir has joined. Good morning, sir. How are you, sir?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
Sorry,
sir.
I was a little late, few minutes.
No, sir, you are on time, sir, and I am given to understand that you have schedule. So I will not waste a lot of time and will quickly invite you for the inaugural address, sir. But I will say that we are very happy to inform you that we had a very high level of interest and participation in this program. As of now, we are more than 120 participants from around 16 to 17 countries have joined for this 2 days of workshops, sir. A word about Sri Ram Mohan Misra ji, Secretary, Women and Child Development, Government of India. He is from Assam and Meghalaya cadre. He has very long experience. If I start reading out his full CV, I will consume the 15 minutes that he has. But suffice to say that he has worked in many sectors of government in Uttar Pradesh, Assam, Government of India, in diverse sectors such as water resources, urban, Ministry of Social Justice Empowerment, Planning, Home, Personal and General Administration, Land Revenue, Water Resources, to name a few. And with those few words, sir, I will not take time from you, sir, and will invite you to say a few words to let our participants know the overall objective of this workshop and what we are trying to achieve in the country and what we want them to kind of know about this whole initiative. Sir, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Bhushan. At the outset, I express my gratitude for this very kind invitation. And I'm glad to know that our friends from across the seas, they're participating in this program. The Ministry of External Affairs and Lal Bahadur Shastri, where you yourself housed. And therefore, at the beginning, I would like to say that this entire theme which you have selected is extremely crucial because we as human community across the globe, if we are to achieve sustainable development goals, if we are there to achieve the goal of inclusive development, then the governance and policy making, they have to be so oriented that half the population of the world not only gets to participate, but meaningfully participate. And this is where policymakers have a very crucial role, because that sets the tone of everything else. And when we're talking about policy, we need to keep in mind that this inclusive governance, there are social, cultural, political, and economic aspects to be addressed. Social, cultural, and political aspects, for these to move and make a mark, the citizen participation in this entire agenda is of very crucial importance. And particularly for the democracies, where citizenry has to be not only sensitive towards certain agenda, but has to actively contribute. And when we talk about citizens, the media comes along, because in terms of opinion making, in terms of bringing behavioral change, so the policies for people's participation, active participation, people-led kind of transformation in these spheres, that is the first fulcrum I would like to flag. Second one, while moving on, after citizens' contribution has been flagged, then talking about the contribution of the state, all the organs of the state. So legislative sphere, we need to not only have progressive legislations, but we also need to keep them up to date all the time. Many times our experience has been that we have a legislation in place, but then the regulations thereunder, they come with a time lag, or with the changing times, with the changing dynamic situation. Those regulations need to be updated. So that's a very important part again. Moving on, the policies, like say, for example, policy on gender, policy on women, say national women policy, national child policy. So these are the documents, these are the instruments which need to be refreshed continuously. And that will not happen until unless we continuously research. And more than research, we need to continuously search for solutions. And that's where the innovation comes to the fore as an agenda and as an outcome. Then after the policies, legislations, regulations, and policies, then we come to the programs. And programs, again, the community participation in the programs, various schemes, and then programs of the government. And this is where there's one tool which has been increasingly catching the attention of policymakers, is the tool of gender budgeting. And as a global community, I think we need to do far more work, because many times the experience has been that in the gender budget statement, there would be numbers for sure, but when these numbers play out in terms of real investment, the desired impact on the gender, desired impact, meaningful impact for the women, may not have. So therefore, the schemes as they move on, in these schemes, not only the provisions have to be made, but we need to make sure that these provisions are also meaningfully spent and also yield desired outcomes. And this is where continuous research, continuous exercise of planning assumes a great importance. And various other aspects. Then let's come to security, safety. This is an important aspect of women across the globe. And this is again the concerted effort of all the players in the criminal justice system. So the policies, the legislation, the way it works, the entire system of criminal justice system, where not only the piece of legislation, which has to be focused and precise, but when it is being implemented, so FIR registration, policing, prosecution, medical legal support, forensic analysis, prosecutors, the adjudication, incarceration, and the entire process of appeal in the higher court. So there are several agencies which play in terms of having meaningful impact on the outcomes. And this entire concept of community policing, communities being sensitive to gender. So this is one very big sphere where so many things are required from this angle. And this entire concept of National Human Rights Commission, and there's so many other agencies involved in this very important activity. So they need to be put in place. And the policy for looking into public grievances, the policy and the action for public grievances redressal, this is equally important. And therefore, what we need to put in place is a very robust mechanism for convergence, very robust mechanism for not only putting in place a convergence goal, but also making sure that those actions are tracked and somewhere down the line, that collective targeting. So we in government, we experience that agencies are there. They have their own schemes and programs, but the way it plays out collectively, all of them together, many times we don't have those kind of clear targets. So therefore, when we talk about inclusive governance, not only the investment has to be booked from the tool of gender budgeting point, but it need to be tracked whether actually it is getting spent, whether it has the desired impact, the process of entire this concurrent evaluation. And while we are fixing a kind of per chart for achieving targets for a particular program and scheme, there need to be a chart also for tracking the collective responsibilities. And this is where, once we put that in place, we all know that convergence is a huge force enterprise, this multiplier. When we converge things, then this is a force multiplier. And moving on from this sphere, we need to also create capacities. So the entire this policy frame, entire this program implementation frame for creating capacities. So when it comes to gender, the capacities in terms of giving the infrastructural support, then technological support, then institutional partnerships which are required for achieving the goals, and then this delivery capacity of the state agency services. That's important. And until unless we make investments in ensuring that, then that will not come. So therefore, the entire investment in creating right kind of leadership, right kind of managerial capacity, and also the capacity to for the citizens to benefit equally from this. So citizens' capacity to benefit from all these investments, the capacity of the state to deliver it efficiently, and overall capacity of the ecosystem to deliver the comprehensive products and services which are required. The certain things which have very long-term kind of play, and this is where the social, cultural, political aspects, they take time to fructify. And therefore, when we're planning investment for gender inclusion, the investments have to be short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Simple things like adequate creche facility. We talk about labor force participation of women, but if the creche is not there, then young mothers, then they'll have to drop out because they will not be able to go to work. Similarly, simple things like ladies' toilets in the workplaces. Those are such a constraint. So if the adequate number of toilets are not there in these places, then those also inhibit, they constrain. And therefore, what I'm saying is small things, but they make a huge difference in terms of gender inclusion in various spheres of our social, cultural, political, and economic activity. Moving on to economic activity particularly, we all know that first generation entrepreneurs, they face peculiar problems. And therefore, there again, there are 6-7 things which need to be delivered in one go. Many times just giving finance is not enough. So this entire issue of removing knowledge asymmetry, information asymmetry, then skilling. And after these have been achieved, then financial inclusion, technological backup, co-working spaces, other infrastructural and logistics support, and the market access particularly. So first generation entrepreneurs, they may not have too much of an idea about designing a product, designing a service. So this entire gamut of resources, those need to be put in place, and ultimately the entire governance frame, which has to be made conducive for the women to not only do well, but are able to actualize their own self in terms of their intrinsic potential. Last two things I would like to flag is women, there are certain things which are needed for their empowerment, like skilling or removing all these bottlenecks. The second aspect is in our culture, women are also known as Shakti, and therefore they have certain intrinsic power, which is over and above what other gender matrix has, and therefore we need to create conditions which are making us capable to harness that power, which is very special to the women. And if we do all this, the gender inclusion is the outcome. But as I said, we need to be very comprehensive. Piecemeal approach, silo-based approach doesn't work. Therefore, citizens, the media, the bureaucracy, all other organs of state, legislature, executive, and judiciary, then human rights groups, non-government organizations, all these, once they join, this collective endeavor, for sure it fructifies. And therefore, when we are talking about policies and right kind of policy framework for gender inclusive governance, we need to be also very comprehensive. It may be little complex, but then that is the minimum requirement. So with these few words, I once again compliment you for having put in place this very wonderful program. And I have to move on for another program, otherwise I would have sat through. You have very wonderful technical sessions. So I look forward to getting those videos and also look forward to hearing the recommendations of this conference. And once again, I'm very grateful for this invite. Thank you very much.
So thank you, sir. Thanks a lot for this address, which covers the span of policy, smaller implementation issues, issues of workplaces, issues of inclusion, issues of economic empowerment, issues of participation. So I understand that you had a lot to share, and 15 minutes is not doing justice to what you are doing right now at the policy level, restructuring the whole gender and child empowerment scenario in the country of more than 1.3 billions. And I must share with the audience over here that sir has been instrumental in the complete restructuring of the different policies that we are doing by the ministry all over the country. And he has gone with the zero budgeting concept, and which is something which is not easy to do, something which requires a lot of vision, foresight, and planning. I must compliment you for taking the initiative, sir. And I must thank you profusely for joining us today, sir. I'm extremely thankful, sir. And we look forward to more participation and support from you in this program and future as well, sir.
Thank you, Vidya. And thank you so much. And then I'm very grateful to each one of you who have participated in this and have listened to me. I'm indeed very, very grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank
Namaste.
you, sir. Thank you, sir. So with these few words, we will move on to next session by Alankrita. However, before starting this session, I will just give a very quick let's overview of the program that we are going to expect in the next 2 days. What we are, I would just take a couple of minutes to introduce the organizations which are involved in this particular workshop. So MEA, the Ministry of External Affairs, conducts this program of ITEC, whereby we invite a very diverse set of people from different countries together for workshops on different governance areas. And I'm absolutely delighted that this workshop on gender inclusive governance brings in an extremely diverse set of people from different countries with different seniority, with very, very interesting experiences. And I'm very happy that the participants have shared their experiences in the Google form that we sent a week back. And they have shared certain insights about their country, the policy space that is in their country, some experiences from their personal interactions and initiatives that they have taken. And we have also tried to capture some of the data points, some of the attitudinal, let's say, insights that we wanted to have about gender and the role it plays in governance and economic development. The we are a center, National Gender and Child Center at the Apex Training Academy of Civil Services in India, which is Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration. We impart training at different levels of seniority to all the people who are coming in the higher civil services. And we look at various aspects of training. And for that purpose, we have various centers who are dealing with specific areas, doing research in different areas, and bringing those research into the training and capacity building. So National Gender and Child Center for last 25 years have been engaged into the issues of gender and children, their issues relating to governance, public policy, public administration, field level issues. We have done various workshops, done a lot of case studies at field level, which brings out the issues of gender discrimination, issues of gender-based violence. We have taken up specific interventions on certain areas such as brick kiln workers, which are more than a few millions in India and many countries, whereby they face a lot of difficulties, challenges, discrimination and violence at their workplaces, whereby the bricks are being made for the construction business. We have done capacity building for district magistrates and senior officers in field. We have done capacity building for National Commission for Women and Child. Today, this workshop is about gender inclusive governance. In this workshop, the structure is like that. We would have basically three pillars that we will build on. First will be the conceptual pillar, whereby we try to understand what does gender mean, how does it, why it is important in the governance, how can we make it more inclusionary, what is the impact of having a policy space and governance space which is not gender sensitive, gender enabled. Once we've done with the conceptual, let's say, clarity and having some insights, that will be done by my colleague Alankrita Singh. That would be the next session. And then we look at two specific aspects of this whole issue of gender. We look at it in two ways. One is the governance issue, whereby we try to look at how our governance is inclusive in terms of policy making, in terms of how we give representation, how we devolve power, how we make the organizations accountable to it. That will be done tomorrow. And today we also look at a very important aspect in the session after Alankrita would be a very important aspect whereby we look at the economic development and how the gender and economic development are connected. So that would be a session which will be taken by our esteemed guest. I would be introducing the guests when the session starts. Without any further addition, I would like to invite now Alankrita. Alankrita is Deputy Director at Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration. She is an officer of Indian Police Service, has served more than 12 years in different capacities at field level. She has been Superintendent of Police in more than 4 districts. She has held several positions. She was also the Executive Director of National Gender Center just a few weeks back. In fact, she is credited with the organizing of the first iteration of this program of gender inclusive governance, which we had very good feedbacks. And probably that's the reason that this time we have more than 130 participants joining today. And I'm very happy and that we are getting such a wonderful audience. It's an absolute privilege to have you all. Now we will invite Alankrita to take the session on why gender is important and looking at various concepts. Alankrita, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So very good afternoon to all the participants. Afternoon in terms of Indian Standard Time, but do accept my greetings based on wherever you are located, whatever time of the day it is in your case. So before I begin, I'll request the IT team at the Academy to check the message box There's still some participants who are saying that they are not able to hear the sound. And I'll request the participants also to please check it on at your own end and figure out what the issue might be. But it seems it's just one or two participants who are not able to hear me. Other participants, can just any one of you type in the chat box as to whether you can hear me clearly or not. Just say that yes, you can hear me. Some of you, just 2-3 of you, and that will be good feedback for me. Thank you so much. So I'll start to share my screen now. Thank you so much for so many messages. This is a good start because I would be posing a few questions to all of you, and I would urge all of you to use the chat box to pose your responses, and I'll try that my questions may be answered in just a yes, no, or a small sentence or half a sentence, and then you can use the chat box to record your responses. So just give me a moment and let me share my presentation with all of you. Request all of you again, if you can confirm that you are able to see my presentation. The first slide says gender inclusive governance. So just type in the chat box if you're able to see the presentation. All right, screen is visible, I'm audible, so we are ready to go. Very warm welcome to all of you. And like my colleague Vidya Bhushan just mentioned, that this is the second iteration of this course, this international course. Of course, we would have loved to do this course and have you all in the Academy campus and do a face-to-face course. But because of COVID, there is greater acceptance of online courses. And in the first iteration of this course, there were about 50 participants from across all continents. And this time it's extremely heartening to have so many participants enrolling in this course. You have chosen to enroll for this course, and we are extremely grateful to you for doing so. And we really sincerely hope that this course is totally worthwhile for you, and it's good return for your time and energy that you would invest in this course. So in this particular session, we would be setting the background, or we would be setting the context, setting the stage for discussions which will happen during the rest of the course. We would be looking at some very basic concepts. For some of you, you may be familiar with these concepts. Still, we believe that it is important to reiterate them to ensure that all of us are on the same page before we start moving on. For some of you, maybe there is a thing or two that's new for you. Then in that case, we welcome you to participate in the discussions. Chat box would be the best means to do so. I'll be asking some questions to all of you just to get the sense of the house. So how do I go next?
You may click on your,
Yeah.
Next slide. Thank you.
I think it was a little slow and there could be a little lag also. So I request all of you to look at my screen, and I have just quoted one piece of statistics, just one. The literacy rate, the world average for boys is 92.9%, and that for girls is 88.2% in the age group of 15 to 24. We could look at so many other data points. We would see gap in almost all such statistics between boys and girls, between men and women. And this gap is much larger in many countries, including many of our countries who are participating today in this program, India being one of them. So we will begin with this understanding that there is gender-based gap in almost all spheres of life. It could be access to health, it could be education, higher education, employment, wages, representation in policy-making decisions. If you recollect, you would have filled out certain questions pertaining to these issues, these statistics in the questionnaire that was circulated to all of you. So The purpose of putting those questions in the questionnaire and the statistics here is to bring it at the forefront that there are huge gaps based on gender on these very basic life amenities, things that are important in one's life. There are gaps based only on gender. And all these gaps in access ultimately lead to gap in dreams and aspirations of people. And somebody has said, is the gender gap report of World Economic Forum that says that at the present rate, it will take nearly a century to achieve parity based on gender. So when we look at the statistics, when we answer these questions, we need to question ourselves. We need to introspect why such glaring disparity. And as global citizens, what can we do about it? And not just citizens, we are all policy makers, policy implementers with designated roles and responsibilities entrusted on us as government officers. So what is it that within our roles and responsibility that we can do to bring about a positive change? Here at this stage, I'll ask you a riddle. The answer is, a one word or two words answer. So get ready, all of you, for the riddle. Record your response in the chat box. The riddle goes like this. A father and a son. The son is 25 years old. They're returning from a trip. Their car meets with an accident and the father dies on the spot. The police inspector is the first to reach the spot, who cries looking at the young boy, "He is my son." If you know the answer, just record it in the chat box. Okay, I'm waiting. Yes, that is the right answer. We have from Lorraine and from Georgiana. Still waiting for more answers. You were very good. Shili, YY, Shirani. Absolutely, sir, ma'am, your answer is correct. The police inspector is the mother of the young boy. So this riddle actually sometimes just shakes us and makes us think that I am a government officer with so many years of work experience, and I am working in areas related to gender equality. How is it that I don't get it in the first go? Why is it that it doesn't occur to me? So this is what gender stereotyping is about, and this is what gender-based bias is about. I'm not saying that all of us are biased, but this is something that happens in our minds, and it juggles our minds, and we do not get the response immediately. It happened with me also when I came across this riddle for the first time ever. So I have a lot of responses now. Let's move on. So from this riddle, let us use this to revise some of our very basic concepts. What is gender? We are talking about gender inclusive governance. Do we understand it thoroughly? Do we understand its implications? Is gender same as sex? How are these two terms different? Even if for the purpose of conceptual clarity, we do use them interchangeably, but for conceptual clarity, for making better sense of the world around us, one can say, this is one of the models, one can say that sex is more about biology. It is about reproductive organs, sexual organs, chromosomes, and gender is about sociology. Gender is about individual and cultural understanding of behaviors, roles, feelings, and activities. Are sex and gender binary? So when we talk of gender-based inequality, are we saying that we are only talking about women and focusing only on women? Are women the only gender that is disadvantaged? How are men also disadvantaged in some sense or the other? And on the spectrum, where do the sexual minorities lie? How do they face disadvantages in the society by virtue of being different, by virtue of not being, not falling on the two ends of the pole, or the binary called male and female? So this is what gender does. It puts all men in something called a man box. So this is what the yellow box denotes masculinity. there are certain characteristics, features, behaviors associated with being a man, and it is about being masculine. These behaviors are considered masculine, and those behaviors that lie outside of this box, they are considered to be less masculine and more feminine. So men are expected to remain within this yellow box, and they are not expected to venture out of this box. There's a similar box for women, which is called a lady box, and the behaviors that are inside this box may be said to be very feminine behaviors, and women are expected to behave as per these behaviors. If they transgress these boundaries, men or women, the society has its own ways of punishing people and making the members of the society fall strictly follow the rules laid down by the society. However, even as we talk about gender inclusion, it seems that all of us are on the same page and we believe that gender roles can be re-examined. Gender roles are not rigid and they can be re-examined. Individual choice may be very important, and individuals' potential capabilities, that may be very important, and gender may not condition people or stuff people in certain boxes. There must be flexibility available to people irrespective of the gender. And how does gender pan out in our real lives? Performing gender identities, like we saw the man box and the lady box. Gender imposes certain, minded that I'm using the word imposes, it imposes gender identities on all of us based on what sex we are born with. And based on these identities, which are socially constructed, there are certain expectations or expected norms or behaviors from us, and we just perform those roles, gender roles. Society polices and protects boundaries. So if one tries to transgress these boundaries, there are punishments which range from simple reprimand or ridicule to serious violence. So society's penalties may actually manifest in terms of very serious forms of violence. We look at some of them which are prevalent in India and based on gender in the next few slides. Then gender is very complex because it intersects with an individual's caste, class, race, ethnicity, or region, or language, and so many other identities. So each individual is made up of multiple identities. Gender is one of them, but vulnerability of an individual or a group of individuals may heighten when their gender intersects with other identities that may have. We look at some examples also, but in case of India, there are data and statistics to show that when it comes to rape, the probability of low caste, so-called low caste women being raped is much higher as compared to the probability of rape of women who do not belong to that low caste. So here we see the intersection of gender with caste. In this context, I would like to mention that we recently wrote a case study on gang rape of a young girl who belonged to a so-called scheduled caste in case of India. And she was working at a brick kiln, and she belonged to a very poor family. So in her case, it was the intersection of her age, her caste, class, ethnicity, region, all these identities intersecting with her gender that made her highly vulnerable to such heinous form of violence. What we call hegemonic masculinity is the culturally valued way of being a man. Sorry for the typo, there has to be a word man there. So, in many cultures, being a man and things associated with a man, they are placed in a hierarchy with a woman or things associated with a woman. For example, the age-old dichotomy of the domestic and the outer world. So the domestic being more associated with women or the feminine gender, and the outer world being more associated with masculinity or the male gender. Now, how come there is a hierarchy between these two? We do not see them as equal, but we see the outer world as superior because it is the economic world. It is where people earn money. It is where economic activities take place. We see that as superior as compared to the domestic world, where people, just cook food and, it's just cleaning the house, and it's just that, it's nothing more than that. How come we value that less as compared to the economic activities? Then all this, men and women all equally being part of a patriarchal setup, it is entirely, it's ultimately about that. In a patriarchal setup, all of us know intuitively what is the role to be performed by men or fathers or grandfathers, and what is the role to be performed by women, mothers, grandmothers, daughters, sisters, and how all of us, men and women, contribute to the perpetuation of patriarchy and its injustices, generation after generation. So inequalities, where do they arise? Question time again. I hope the participants are ready to respond in the chat box. In your own society and culture, do you see any gender-based inequalities based in a home setup or a family setup? Imagine a typical family or home setting. Where do you see, give me an example, a very specific example of where do you see gender-based inequality in a family setup? So I'll be waiting for your responses in the chat box. I'll repeat my question once more. Based on your understanding, based on what you have seen, based on your own experience, give me a specific example of gender-based inequality as it may exist in a home or family setup. I'll type the question also for all of you. So start keying in your responses. Give me an example of a gender-based inequality in a family. Let's see whose response I receive first. Okay, thank you for your responses. So assignment of responsibilities in a home, cooking and care work, cooking, washing, care work being given to the feminine gender. Types of toys we give to boys and girls. Boys are given priority in education, in nutrition, man being the breadwinner, woman being the housewife. These are all examples of inequalities that may exist in a family itself. Gender is physical, gender is abstract. Thank you so much for your responses. Boys given first priority in education. Absolutely. Women being reserved, or a man being more vocal. Boys get more attention. Attention itself is a very important thing. Then women are engaged in employment and are responsible for domestic. So double word burden, women bearing the double burden. Girls get less property share than boys. Cooking, washing, all these tasks are entrusted only to women. Many professions are considered male oriented, and many professions are considered female oriented as well. Household chores are delegated to girls. All right. So this is exactly what I wanted to hear from all of you. And we spoke of a family setup, but look at other realms in our lives. From family, we can move on to community. And in your own cultural context, you can ask yourself, what are the gender-based inequalities that exist in your community? I have given some examples here from my own experience. Media portrayal of women that reinforces gender-based stereotypes, lack of community role models for women, like somebody said that certain professions are considered to be more male dominated. So we have so many examples where women would like to be in the army and would like to be soldiers, but there are lack of community role models for them. When we look at the market, by market, I mean the entire economic realm. So the entire realm where we have jobs, employments, financial institutions, and workplaces, and things like that. So in the market also, we see instances of unequal wages, unequal job opportunities. These are all gender-based inequalities at the level of a market. There is an acronym here. You see it. You see it here. This is actually a short form for sexual harassment at workplace. SH at WP, sexual harassment at workplace. I'm so sorry. Yeah. So also at the level of the state, I'm talking about the laws, our governments, various departments, ministries, bureaucracy. When we see all these together, here also we do find inequalities based on gender. You can examine gender-based inequalities in these four spheres of family, community, market, and state in your own context. So an inquiry of this kind, where you are trying to examine gender-based inequalities, helps us see a clear picture, the larger picture, and helps us focus our energies in terms of policy making and implementation, helps us identify the areas where we need to work as government officers. Having looked at the gender-based inequalities, the next logical step is gender-based violence. This is probably the worst consequence of gender-based inequalities. The following kinds of forms of violence that are written in red color, they are all largely based on gender. When we speak of sex-selective abortion and feticide, it is reflected in the sex ratio of various countries, including India, that being highly skewed in the favor of the male child. In India, we have traditional forms of violence like domestic violence, child marriage, and dowry harassment, etc. And with the infusion of technology, we have sexual harassment, e-stalking, child pornography. All these are have grown in proportion and size. I mean, they are humongous. All these issues because of because e-platforms offer a lot of anonymity, and the government agencies are not yet capable of dealing with this humongous problem. Then all over the world, we have highly organized crimes of trafficking, and India is both a source destination as well as transit location. We have sexual harassment at workplace, and what we call eve teasing is now actually termed as sexual harassment, and eve teasing is a euphemism, and sexual harassment is illegal in this country, and there are penal provisions to deal with various forms of sexual harassment. Then we have very heinous offenses like kidnapping, honor killing, acid attack, rape, and murder. So just see the huge range of violence that is meted out to a particular gender, or to all other genders or people lying on the gender spectrum apart from the male gender. The male gender may be considered to be less affected by these specific forms of violence. Okay, so I'll just recap what we have done so far. We started by saying that sex and gender may be differentiated as sex being about biology and gender being about sociology. We are trying to understand how gender is a socially constructed, so how gender is socially constructed by the society through various forms of carrot and stick, reward and punishment. And all members of the society are forced to obey certain laws of gender. Boys are told how they need to grow up and become men and how they need to behave as men. And similarly for girls, how this kind of social construction of gender actually conditions, restricts both, the possibilities for both men and women. how this kind of thinking actually leads to inequalities in a society. So men and women may be different, that's absolutely fine, but they are unequal as well. So this inequality is what we are together trying to address today. Then when we speak of inequalities based on gender, they can be seen across all realms of the society. Even in our daily lives, they manifest in various forms. And when the identity of gender intersects with other identities of an individual or a set of individuals, then their vulnerability may get heightened, say when gender intersects with caste, class, etc. Then gender-based inequality, we said, leads to various forms of violence meted out to members from the feminine gender and members from across the gender spectrum who are not concentrated at the pole called male. This is what we've seen so far. Moving on. Yeah, and in India, we have very specific laws to deal with each of these. However, all these being more rooted in the structural inequality based on gender, more rooted in the sociology, and the social change is slow to come by. So implementation of all these laws is a huge challenge in this country. Let me just keep a check on my time. Somebody please let me know if I'm able, what time do I need to finish this? 3? $3:30, right?
You would have time till 3:40.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so if you have any questions so far or observations or something that you would like to share, again, please feel free to type in the chat box. I'll be monitoring the chat box. Okay. So having set the backdrop for the next set of concepts, this is where I would request your attention, all of you, because so far we were discussing things as citizen, just citizen, somebody who's educated, somebody who's a thinking person, who observes the things around oneself, who's able to identify inequalities, who's able to see patterns in those inequalities, and who's able to discern where this is rooted and things like that. So we discussed some concepts which all of us need to know as citizen, as educated citizen. However, in our, when we step into our shoes of government officers, where we have the capability to design policies, to influence policies, or we are implementing things at the cutting edge level. Now, the set of concepts that are coming up, these may be very useful for us in that role or capacity. So, what is Yatukulla Singh? You've raised your hand. Do you want to say something? Ask something? Please do type your observations in the chat box. If you want to say something, please go ahead. Okay. So I was going to now discuss with all of you what is a gender-aware policy design. So some policies can sometimes be gender blind when they ignore gender needs. We'll do all this with certain examples of policies. I'll obviously be taking examples from my own country, some policies that I would have seen implemented by various state governments or by government of India. I would be taking examples from there. After this slide, we would also be looking at a lot of examples from various states across the country. I'm sure something similar would be done, is likely to be implemented in your countries also. And there may also be some very creative ideas coming from various countries across the globe who are participating today. So here, your feedback and your sharing of thoughts would be very, very useful for us, and it'll add to the discussion, and we really look forward to. So while I go through the rest of the presentation, just feel free to type your thoughts in the message box. And it's a huge opportunity. I hope you realize that if you type a message about a policy being implemented in your country, it is simultaneously disseminated to 120 participants from all across the world. So use this opportunity, share your thoughts in the chat box. So let us look at some policies that may be gender blind. So by gender blind, I mean a policy that paints everybody with the same brush. It gives benefits to all beneficiaries who may be all beneficiaries for a particular policy, irrespective of their gender. This may be called gender neutral as well, but because we are doing a session on gender aware policy design, we may like to call it gender blind, because it completely ignores any differences between individuals based on gender. What could be the examples? You can think in your own context. Suppose a particular state government decides to build a few engineering colleges for young students. They want to encourage young students to pursue engineering. And not just college, they are also giving scholarships to young students to be able to pursue their engineering degree. Now, just think in terms of this policy, just try to evaluate this policy from a gender lens. So this policy says all students are eligible, equally eligible. It does not distinguish between boys and girls. Then this means that this policy does not take into account the education gap which is there between boys and girls at primary level, secondary level, and senior secondary level. It completely ignores that. It also ignores the data which says that girls are less likely to pursue mathematics and physics and engineering than boys, not because they're not capable of doing that, because it may be more expensive. There may be many, many reasons why girls may be less willing to pursue this. So here, this is a policy that ignores gender needs. So think in terms of your own country. Can you think of some policies that are gender blind? We are not saying that those policies are no good at all. No, we are not saying that. We are saying that a little bit of gender inclusion built into them would make them even more effective in bridging the gender gap. So then there could be another set of policies that may be called as gender sensitive. There would be a third category. We haven't reached there, gender aware policy design. So from gender blind, we are now looking at policies that are gender sensitive. They address practical gender needs or alleviate the women's condition. So gender sensitive policies actually acknowledge that in certain spheres, women may have a lower status. Women may have some pressing needs. Their condition may be bad. For example, widows in our country, in various states have widow pension schemes. And these schemes actually acknowledge the fact that the status of a widow is lower in a society, and she may have children to bring up, and she may have many of her own needs, which she may be incapable of meeting from her own resources. And that's why she needs support. She needs support of the state. She needs the government to stand by her. And to lift her from that status of destitution. So this policy of this kind, say widow pension, policies of this kind, they are gender sensitive. They try to address practical gender needs. I encourage you to think in the context of your own country. Think of examples of gender blind policies. Think of examples of gender sensitive policies. Okay, so what gender sensitive policies do, they address practical gender needs. However, a widow pension scheme, while it acknowledges that widows need support and tries to provide that support to them, on the other hand, this policy is not capable of alleviating the status of a widow in our society. This policy stops at supporting her, but is not able to empower her so that she stands on her own 2 feet and does not need any government support. So then we are actually talking about the next stage, which is gender redistributive policy. Gender redistributive policies addresses strategic gender needs. It improves or alleviates women's position or social status in a society. This policy is actually about empowerment. So this policy is not about help, support, etc., etc. It is about empowerment of that individual. So a very good example of a gender redistributive policy would be the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment of this country, where there was, a specific number of seats were reserved for women when it came to the local governments. The local governments are directly elected by the people at the level of the panchayat in villages and at the level of municipal bodies in cities. It was at this edge level democracy, or also called cutting roots democracy. It was at that level that certain number of seats were reserved for women, and this was done like in 1973-74, and this policy has continued so far, and many theoreticians, academicians have studied the impact of this policy and have documented how this policy over time has led to empowerment of 3 generations of women leaders, grassroots leaders. And this is an example of a policy where it does not merely support a woman, but it gives leadership position to a woman, and it creates role models for the next generation of women, and it gives opportunity to women leaders to frame policies, to implement them, bring about a change in the society, to be the leaders in the society, basically. We have one of the speakers, Ms. Uma Mahadevan, who would be specifically talking about this Amendment Act in greater detail, what has been achieved since this act was implemented till date, and what are the things to be proud of, and how this country today has a huge number of young, aspiring, confident women leaders at the grassroots democracy level. So just to recap these 2 very, very important concepts: practical gender needs versus strategic gender needs. Okay, let us recap these 2 concepts. Let me also quickly have a look at the chat box. Okay, so we have Mr. Lorraine sharing with all of us that it is a gender blind policy to require all school leavers to get a certain pass rate in order to qualify for government scholarships. Girls should be given more opportunities to get awards for sponsorships. I think all the participants will agree with you, sir, that this policy ignores the needs of girl students, the specific needs of girl students, which apply to them, and those needs may not apply to the boys. It ignores that girl students face more challenges and impediments in pursuing their study or in getting good grades as compared to boy students, because they are also caregivers for their younger siblings, for their elderly parents and things like that. So a very, very valid example from your side, and I'll encourage other participants also to share specific examples like that. It'll really add value to this discussion and it'll help all of us. So let us just revise this again: practical gender needs versus strategic gender needs. Practical gender needs actually respond to the needs of women and men within their socially accepted roles in the society. These do not attempt to modify gender inequalities as they exist in the society. All right. So they completely ignore that women and men, girls and boys may be placed differently in terms of being recipients of a certain policy, in terms of being beneficiaries of a certain policy. They may be placed differently. So some may be capable of being recipients, some may not even be capable of being recipients by virtue of their gender. So this policy often focuses on women's condition, often tries to alleviate women's condition, and it is more in the form of a support package. So help package or support package. We are not discounting the importance of such policies. Till we have violence against women, till we have a lot of other impediments in their way to education, to employment, etc., these policies will continue to be relevant. What we need to do is to recognize their shortfall, or how they can be made more gender inclusive, and how can there be a shift from addressing women's condition to empowering women's position. So all the policies need to move in that direction. They may focus more on women's condition, but they need to gradually move towards that direction where they're actually alleviating women's position in the society. That's what strategic gender needs are. In addition to responding to the concrete needs of women and men, these are aimed at redistributing the roles, responsibilities, and power between them. So if there are gender-based roles in families, in society, in government, everywhere, then probably there needs to be redistribution of power between these two, so as to reduce inequities and bring about a transformation. Strategic gender needs can be addressed by bringing about a legal reform, and we can talk of issues like reproductive choices, etc. These policies alleviate women's position. Please do ask me if you have any question. This slide shows us some examples of laws in the case of India that we believe have created an enabling environment in the country for gender equality. In the meantime, let's look at the comment from Mr. John, who shares with us that Constitution 2010 in Kenya has promoted gender equality and equity, though still has hiccups in its implementation. Okay, sir, thank you for sharing that. And something more specific about what the Constitution says and how it brings about gender empowerment. What does it do to bring about gender empowerment? That would help us further to further understand your point. I think having our responses should be informed by data and evidence. Sometimes over-representation of one gender downplays the good intention to ensure gender equality. Absolutely, sir. So we do see over-representation of women in certain sectors, like specifically those that are associated with caregiving. So we see more representation of women in primary schools, as nurses in hospitals and things like that. And we can also look at this overrepresentation of women from the gender lens that we discussed in the session. Enabling environment in India, we have certain articles of the Constitution that ensure right to equality to all citizens. 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, I briefly mentioned to you and would be dealt with in more detail by Ms. Uma Mahadevan. Then the Parliament of India ratified the CEDAW has been ratified. India has ratified CEDAW. Then the Ministry of Women and Child Development was created in 1985, the National Commission for Women in 1992. Women and Child Development departments of various states have been created, and women commissions for various states have been created. Then we have a lot of laws, like I discussed with you, various forms of violence that exists in our society against women. To deal with each of them, there are certain specific laws that have been listed out here. So this does create an enabling environment in this country for women's empowerment. Some more policies and programs in India. Our country had universal adult franchise right from the very first election of independent India. There were programs for adult education. So Praud Shiksha means adult education, short stay homes, and so many things. But you would realize that the first set of, even the second set of policies and programs were largely based on alleviating women's condition. They were largely based on improving women's condition in the society, rather than being based on improving women's position or the power, changing the power dynamics, right? You do see that shift that I was talking about here in these policies also. That's why the 73rd, 74th Amendment has been placed here. So this is how we see that kind of a shift in the policies in India. 73rd, 74th Amendment, I think I would skip this because Uma Mahadevan madam would be doing this in more detail. But let us look at some more schemes, and do share with us if there are similar schemes in your own countries. All right. So this free bicycles schemes, all the free, all students graduating from, who complete their class 10th, they are given free bicycles in the state of Karnataka. And the idea is to improve mobility, to encourage them to continue their education, to not drop out. So girls who are located in rural areas, often drop out because intermediate colleges may not be located very close to their villages. So that leads to high dropout rate at that level. So free bicycles are given. Then distribution of free laptops. This is a mobility of its own kind. It may not be physical mobility, but it gives access to the students to the internet and to the whole world of knowledge, right? So these two are examples of addressing mobility and access issues for girl students. I just saw a comment. Let me just share with all of you. Okay. Under which gender do homosexuals fall? Do they fall under their birth identity? So I have only, been mentioning the gender spectrum. I didn't go into that question in detail, but thank you for, bringing it up. In our country, the law is in the process of being firmed up when it comes to the rights of transgender persons. And it's only very recently that I was attending an online workshop by UNDP, which was in which we interacted with trans men community of India, who are, they are trying to work with the government in the drafting of the law for transgender persons, law, the rules and regulations, etc. So that was a very interesting workshop where we heard firsthand experiences of trans men in India, how they were discriminated, they are continuously discriminated against, and how the law needs to be shaped so as to enable them to be fully functioning, participating individuals, to be equal citizen. Even they have been denied even that right so far. So on the gender spectrum or on the spectrum of sex, there are many individuals who may fall somewhere in between. They may not find themselves, located at the two poles of male or female. They lie somewhere on the spectrum. When we speak of gender equality, then all individuals, irrespective of their location on the spectrum, do need to have very basic and equal rights to start with. right to life, right to education, like one of the participants has also listed in the chat box. So all those rights need to be ensured to each and every individual, irrespective of his or her sex, gender, or sexuality. Thank you for bringing that up. So another example is from the Telangana state, where they have introduced compulsory gender education for adolescent boys and girls. So this is where through their syllabi, they try to question the basic premises of distribution of roles based on gender in families, societies, and in the employment world. So what do you think? Do answer in yes or no. Do you think that this policy is gender redistributive? Yes or no? Do you think such a policy would change women's condition, or do you think it is really going to change the position of the women in the society? So what do you think? Such a policy is gender redistributive or not? In the meantime, a lot of you are sharing a lot of good examples from your own country. Thank you for doing that. I'll repeat my question. So this policy of state of Telangana of compulsory gender education to all adolescent boys and girls, do you think it is gender redistributive? Yes or no? So Fakama Shili says yes. A lot of you say yes. Yes. Hmm. Okay, I agree with all of you that it is possible that this policy may actually change, redistribute roles in the society and improve the power dynamics in the society for women. However, I saw a very important observation here. It is still the boys who have a better chance to education than girls. Yes. So there again, a discrepancy between the two would be there. A very, very valid point. Thank you for adding that. Now I'm going to show you another example of, this is from Kochi or Cochin Metro. And in this particular scheme or policy, employment opportunity was provided to 1,000 women, including transgenders. And Kochi Metro became the first women-run metro in the entire world. There was capacity building, proper training, and everything was imparted to a set of women and transgenders. And this is one of its kind in India. And again, this is a policy which will lead to power redistribution in the society, which is likely to be more gender inclusive. And it's not only working on alleviating status of women, but it's working on actually improving the social status of the women and transgender persons in the society. So a gender redistributive policy. Yeah. So this is the last example that I have picked up, and I'm sure you see on your screens these women in uniform. They are all police officers from the state of Uttar Pradesh. The state of Uttar Pradesh gives 20% reservation to women in police. And this was my team in my last posting. And they are all women police officers at the rank of constable, head constable, sub inspector. Now, why did I pick this particular image? The picture itself, I believe, says a lot, because there are certain laws in India that mandate that certain specific roles are to be performed only by women police officers. For example, recording the statement of a child who's a victim of sexual offenses, it can be done only by women. Investigation of certain offenses like that can done only by women police officers. But overall representation of women in police in India is 7% or less than that. This being extremely low, The police department faces huge challenge in implementing certain legal mandates, and even the police department is deprived of diversity. It has only one particular or masculine view and work culture, in the absence of women and persons from the rest of the spectrum of gender and sex. So representation from diverse sections of the society, that is important for any organization, including a police department. This particular policy of providing reservation ensures that at least 20% women are inducted every year, and slowly and gradually their overall percentage in the department improves year after year. These women then become change agents as well as role models for younger boys and girls. So this was another example of a power redistributive kind of policy. This was another such example. And we are almost about to close, and this would be the definition of women's empowerment. I have picked it up from the UN Women website, and let us delve on this, because what are the 5 components of women's empowerment? Let us delve on each of these very briefly. And why, this actually justifies why at all are we talking about women's empowerment? Why at all is it important for us as government officers to contribute to this cause? So women's empowerment has 5 components: women's sense of self-worth, right to have and determine choices. So there have to be some choices, and there have to be the ability to exercise those choices. All right. Then right to have access to opportunities and resources. Access is the key word here. Access to opportunities and resources. That is where the gender blind policies fail, because in gender blind policies, there are opportunities and resources, but often there is no access. Right to have power to control their own lives, both within and outside their homes. Ability to influence the direction of social change, to create a more just social and economic order nationally and internationally. So to me, women's empowerment then simply means empowering an individual and giving that capability to that individual for her to become a fully functioning individual, for her to become a citizen who contributes meaningfully to the policies, and to who can be a change agent for the society that she is living in. So this captures the crux of the idea of women's empowerment. Let's close with this quote from Ban Ki-moon. He says that we cannot fulfill 100% of the world's potential by excluding 50% of the world's people. The evidence is clear. Equality for women means progress for all. I close with this, and thank you so much for participating and for your messages. Even as you move on to the next session, I would like to, I would be going through your messages. Slides, yes, I would request Anjali from the center to share. I'm sure they would be sharing all the slides and presentations with all of you. If there are any questions, do leave behind in the chat box. That is all from my side, and my time is up also. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Alankrita, for sharing the insights about gender and how it is affecting different stakeholders, how it is affecting our policy, and how policies are being designed, redesigned in different countries. I'm extremely thankful to you for explaining it in a lucid details and also sticking to the time. Thank you for that. And I was looking through the chat box myself, and I can see a lot of interesting comments, messages coming in. I believe that this is the strength of this program. There's so much of diversity and people coming from different perspectives, and then they are kind of sharing their examples from different areas, and we also get to learn a lot in the process. So thank you for sharing. We probably were not able to respond to all the sharing, all the questions because of lack of time, but I can assure you that we are looking at it, and wherever we find that there is a need for further clarification, we will pass it on to our speakers who will respond to it. Thank you for that. Thank you, Alankrita. And we will now move to the next session. For the next session, which we have our set of speakers already joined, we will have a very short screen time break for 3 to 4 minutes. And during that time, probably if you want to take off some time from the screens, that's pretty okay. We'll start at sharp 3:45 Indian time. Divya has joined and my other colleagues have joined. So we'll take just a short break. Do not log out. Just be there, and we will start in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Thank you, dear participants. Divya, thank you for joining us. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Vidya.
Do we have our other speakers on joining? So Geeti would be joining a bit late. And we have Manisha ma'am. Thank you, Manisha ma'am, for joining us. Right. So we'll just wait for a couple of minutes and then we'll start.
Sure.
The last session, as I just to brief my speakers about, the last session looked into the basic concepts of gender, looking at various aspects of gender, trying to differentiate between gender and sex, also looking at how it is affecting different aspects of our life, including markets, including family, governance, politics, all these things. And then we looked at various examples and of how it is manifested and how it aggravates, how it leads to discrimination and then violence, going on to violence. Then we looked at how it is impacting the policy space. That is where we kind of took a lot of examples from many countries in the process, learned a lot. Now we are looking for this interesting session whereby we will try and benefit from experience of all my esteemed speakers. And for that, we'll start in a couple of minutes and we'll introduce the speakers and then we'll go on. Okay, thank you. So welcome back all. We are ready to start the next session. I will start by introducing Divya. Divya, who would be taking the first set of conversations, and then we go to the other speakers. So Divya has been working on the issue of gender and how it plays out into the economic space in terms of migration, in terms of people coming for opportunities to cities, and does it really give them opportunity, an equal participation. She has done a lot of field work at the ground level in India. She has been associated with Ajivika Bureau. Her recent case studies, when we had the pandemic breakout of COVID and other ways also, has been very insightful. I would not like to take time away from the speakers while introducing them in a great length. So I will invite Divya to share her thought first. I must just say that this whole second session is about how this gender comes into the economic space, how does it influences development, and how there is a interconnect between development itself and the gender empowerment. There's a back and forth between two, and how do we, is there a way to explore this thing further? So with those few words, Divya, over to you. And in terms of questions and answer, as I said that please use the chat box to ask questions. All our panelists would be there for the whole duration. They will address questions other than during their talk. And if there are some questions which remain unanswered, they will be doing it after their talk also. So Divya, over to you. Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Vidya, for this opportunity. It's really a privilege to be here and to be able to address so many international participants from diverse cultures and countries. I hope my slides are visible. Yeah. So just at the outset to introduce my organization, I work for Ajivika Bureau, which is a specialized public service initiative that works with migrant workers in cities as well as in rural areas. So we run worker facilitation centers in the form of migrant resource centers for migrant workers and their families and migrant communities, both at the rural areas in India from where people migrate in large numbers, as well as in the urban destinations where people find work in large numbers of informal kind of labor markets. So most of my perspectives are actually drawn from that lens in terms of women's participation in informal labor markets, how migration actually influences the experiences of women workers in the job markets in cities today, and what are some of the gendered burdens that they face in the course of this migration and in the course of this movement back and forth between the villages and the cities. So I will start by setting a context, a national context with regard to women and informality and some statistics there. I will also delve slightly deeper into two research studies. One is a seminal research study that was done by the Center for Women's Development Studies in Delhi that covers about 20 cities in the country. So it represents a pan-Indian perspective, specifically with respect to women in migration. And the second study is something that my organization conducted in the city of Ahmedabad, which specifically looks at the experiences of migrant women in the construction sector in the city of Ahmedabad. I will also then move to some specific kind of analysis of the issue and then close out with some recommendations.
Divya, can I request you to go on the slideshow mode?
Yes, sure.
Slightly
yeah.
bigger and visible to everybody.
Yes. Is this better?
This is better. Thank you.
So just to sort of start with the national context in India, about 93% of total employment in India is estimated to be in the informal sector, which means that there are no written work contracts or no guaranteed employment really. So most people are predominantly kind of employed in the informal workforce, and they're majorly outside the ambit of social security. So this is like a pan-Indian context with regard to total employment in India. And if we look at the share of women in this total employment, it is about 23%. Recently, there has been a lot of discourse in India regarding the declining participation of women workers or female labor participation in the workforce in India. And this figure that I'm quoting right now is also a substantial decrease from the last decade in 2011-12, when this data was about 27%, and now it has come down to about 23%, and it's a cause for great concern. So when we juxtapose both of these statistics together, the 93% in the informal economy and the 23% of women in total employment in India, we find that nationally women are disproportionately represented in informal employment, which means that about 92% of women who are employed at all in the country are informally employed. So that really highlights the kind of precarious work opportunities that are in general available to women workers in India. And if we delve slightly deeper into the context of informality and informal work, we find that migrant workers actually constitute a large section of informal workforce in India. So when I talk about migrant workers, I actually mean people who are moving from areas in India that undergo severe rural distress. So there are large sections of rural India where agriculture is actually not doing well at all, and there is a large distress that we see in rural areas today. Simultaneously, there is an increase in urbanization, increase in the pace in urbanization. There are much more opportunities in the urban labor markets. So both of these forces, when they interact with each other, actually gives rise to a large magnitude of people moving between villages and cities. So they go to the cities seasonally in order to find employment in the urban labor markets. And there is a constant movement back and forth between the villages and the cities, especially among people who are very poor and vulnerable. So this migration is really seasonal in nature. It is undertaken in non-agricultural seasons. It is circular migration, which means there is a back and forth. People don't really look to always settle down in the cities, but they come back to their villages when there is not enough availability of work in the cities. This kind of migration is also disproportionately constituted by historically marginalized communities like the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribe. And predictably, because they do not have many social networks in the city, they do not know how to navigate the urban life, they occupy the bottom and hazardous rungs of work in sectors such as construction, retail, factories, and recycling. And this issue actually came to the forefront very recently, especially last year, when there was a COVID-related lockdown, and many of you must have seen images of many migrant families walking back from the cities on their foot back to their villages. Many families, including children and older people, and it is estimated, informally estimated, that the magnitude of this issue in the country is about 140 million, which is a huge number, but we are yet to come up with official statistics really to estimate how big this issue is. And I just wanted to paint this picture of internal migration just to bring in the aspects of women's migration into this, just to locate this issue of women's migration within the broader context of migration and informality in the country. And the findings that I'm presenting in the next two slides are actually from a study that I described before, which was conducted by the Center for Women's Development Studies. It was a pan-Indian study that was conducted across 20 cities in India, where they tried to survey many numbers of migrant women workers, and it was a seminal study that for the first time looked at the gendered experiences of women in the migrant workforce. So it said that about out of the 140 million that is estimated to be the magnitude of internal labor migrants, about 15% is constituted by women. And many experts actually think that this could be an underestimation because in large-scale national level surveys like the decennial census that is undertaken in our country, most often there is a focus on marriage as a reason for women's migration. So employment is not really marked as a reason for why women migrate. It's always recorded as marriage is recorded as the most important reason why women migrate. So that in effect really masks the participation of women in informal labor markets in cities, especially where they move after their marriage, when they migrate after marriage and start working in informal labor markets in the cities. That is not really counted as part of large-scale national surveys. So there is an underestimation here, yes, but still we see that about 15 to 20% of internal labor migrants are constituted by women. About 60% of this female labor migration is temporary in nature. Again, there is a lot of back and forth, which means that they are never able to really get a toehold in the city, gain a foothold in the city. They're never really able to settle down, so to say, in the cities. There is a notable link between the nature of women's migration and their social background. So for example, communities such as scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, which are the indigenous communities in India, they are the ones who have a lower asset base, for example, in the villages, or lower education levels. They are the ones who are seen to be engaging in this short-term circular migration movement involving very hard manual labor and work in precarious kind of work settings. It was also found that there is very little work diversification among women, which means that women are not really able to undertake a lot of occupational shifts. So that indicates concentration in very few jobs, which might not be very remunerative at all. So for example, in the rural areas, this was an engagement in brick kilns and agriculture work, while in the urban areas, most women were seen to be focused on domestic work. Again, just to continue with the findings from the study, it was also found that women have very limited independent identity as a worker. Most women engage in family units of male-female pair, which is called a jodi in Hindi, and it is characterized by debt bondage. So all of the salary payment, wage payment that happens to the husband, and the women never really gets access to any of the wage payment and that the contractor might hand out. And a lot of it is undertaken or started, the whole migration starts with an advance to the family. So it also encourages some kind of a debt bondage experience within these families. Most women migrant workers migrate with their minor children. So that brings along a lot of responsibilities of childcare and providing for them in an alien environment, which is the city. A vast majority of them were employed in unskilled work, which means that despite long years of working in the same sector or in the same occupation, they're really unable to break through the glass ceiling or through the barriers of gender to perform or to be compensated for skilled work, even though they absolutely might know how to do masonry work. Still, they would only be compensated for unskilled work at the rates given to an unskilled worker. There were, of course, predictably a lot of experiences of violence, threats, and forced work, which were common. And mostly it was found that principal employers, supervisors, and contractors were the biggest kind of perpetrators of these violence. So this was a pan-Indian study that really looked at a more nationally representative picture of the experiences of women migrants. The second study that I want to kind of quote was titled "No City for Migrant Women," and this was a study that was undertaken as part of our organization, where we really looked at the experiences of women construction workers who engaged in family migration, who migrated with their families, and all of them were from the tribal communities, which are the indigenous communities in India. to the city of Ahmedabad, which is, again, as I said earlier, it has experienced exponential growth rates in the past decade. So it's in that context that these findings, we were able to come up with these findings. So we found that access to basic amenities remains a huge challenge for these workers. A lot of these women live in open spaces, that is under pavement, under flyovers, on roadside pavements, on open spaces of public land with just a blue, tarpaulin sheet that is constructed. So very, very temporary kind of accommodation with no access to public water or sanitation facilities. So we found that women living in such spaces actually spend up to an hour accessing toilets in the morning, and they have to wake up as early as 3:30 or 4 a.m. in the morning when it is still dark in order to be able to access. So for example, the photograph here is of a paid toilet facility in Ahmedabad, and they have to use it before the men start coming. So similarly in the construction sites, they're unable to, where they also live. So construction sites also double up as living sites for women workers, where they are unable to use the toilets after 6 a.m. because the men start lining up after that. Often the toilets are really kind of dysfunctional because they're not cleaned very often. And what this forces them to do is to abstain from food and water just to prevent the urge of using toilets. So it's biologically, it really, you can imagine the kind of violence that is to one's own body, that you just stop consuming water so that you're not forced to use the toilet because there are no toilets in sight. They work very long hours, about 17 hours a day, collecting water in the open spaces. Additionally, those women who are living in open spaces have to really secure their belongings when they go to work. So they spend an hour packing and unpacking their household assets every day, a lot of time in cooking and childcare, and also walking back and forth between their work sites. If one were to look at the intensity of the hard work that women do, they walk up to 10 kilometers on an average throughout the day, carrying around, large sacks of bricks on their shoulders and heads, with very little rest, only about 15 minutes during the day. And it's very difficult for them to take a break from work until the machine stops or until they find a replacement, because especially in tasks such as centering, when the roof is getting built, there is a lot of pressure on the workers to keep working until the machine is running. So it's very difficult to take a break in between this intense kind of work day. At the end of the work day, of course, also women spend an average of 30 additional minutes performing gender-based work, which is not really counted as labor. So for example, watering the bricks or cleaning up the work site or serving tea. So all of this is considered very unskilled work and very gender-based work that is only given to women members of the workforce, but they are not compensated at all for this, for the performance of this kind of chore. And if we look at childcare, we also see that a lot of minor children also migrate with women workers. So even though it is mandated as per law, as per the Building and Other Construction Workers Welfare Act, which was a landmark legislation in India, even then, 95% of the construction sites in Ahmedabad that we surveyed did not have a creche facility, even though many women workers work there. So children are just left to fend for themselves in the open in construction sites. Women only get time to breastfeed about 1 to 2 times during the workday, and which is especially in a scenario where the children have to be breastfed at least for the first 6 months of their birth. This has huge implications on the intergenerational transmission of malnutrition, bad health outcomes, and early childcare outcomes in children. And it's only really half an hour per day that they're able to exclusively focus on childcare because of the other responsibilities that are there. If we look at their impact on health and well-being, we found that pregnant women spend up to 8 months working on the site. So in late stages of pregnancy, they're still working, and they have to come back within 15 days of their delivery because there is so much economic pressure on them to start earning. There are no access to maternity benefits because all of the work that they do is in the informal realm. There's no record of their work, and there is no identity that they have as a worker, due to which they are not not really able to access maternity care that are otherwise available to them as part of the building workers regulation. They do not really take a day off because the living spaces are very unsafe. They experience a lot of violence in these sites. So even if they take a sick day, they are not able to go take rest there. And healthcare is very difficult to access in the city. And this, of course, has huge impacts on their reproductive and menstrual hygiene as well. So this was just some of the observations that we had as part of our study, and it was an ethnographic study. So that is why the observations are very minute, where we followed women. We did a time use study of their routine movements, of the amount of time that they spend on each activity in a day. So that really explains the kind of the texture of information and findings that I was able to present. So if we were to just analyze these findings a little bit before I close. So really what the women do is that they absorb the compounded effects of a hostile city and poor work conditions with their bodies and minds. So there is a lot of physical, mental and cognitive burden also as well, because there is a lot of planning that they have to do single-handedly to provide for their entire households. It's of course, there is of course also the added burden along with participating in the labor market, along with performing unpaid care work, along with performing other reproductive functions. There is, and on account of being a migrant worker, there is also this added responsibility of reproducing their households in very frugal kind of conditions, because every time a family moves from one work site to another, the woman is really in charge of reproducing this household each time they move. And without any basic kind of time or labor saving devices, the entire burden of that comes on the women. Accessing basic facilities and resources for themselves and their household, like for example, accessing water, firewood, sanitation, healthcare, all of these become very, very challenging chores. And this is also because they are not residents in the city that they migrate to. So the eligibility to the public entitlements in the city is very constrained for them. And all of this work is performed in a very highly gender discriminatory, exploitative labor market, where they face multiple vulnerabilities that is based on their gender, caste, class, and ethnic kind of identities. In addition to income poverty, they also experience time poverty, which means they work longer and harder, and they put in more labor input per unit time to sustain their households in the city. And if you really look at all this, or if you try to locate the gender burden performed by women in the overall sort of context, what the women end up doing is that they're subsidizing the lack of responsibility or subsidizing the negligence by the state and the employer in providing basic facilities to their workforce. So it's because they are not able to access basic entitlements from the government, or they are not provided with work-related entitlements by the employer. It is actually those burdens that are being compensated by women's work in this context. So this is just my last slide with respect to some of the recommendations, and these are sort of broad recommendations in terms of consideration for policy. What can be some of the elements that can drive a robust kind of a policy response? So I think, like I mentioned earlier, data is a very important building block for any effective policy response. So I think we really need macro data that captures the gender dimensions of migration, so that the triggers from women's migration can be faithfully captured, and their independent identity as workers can be established. And this kind of a database, or this kind of an enumeration can then be leveraged upon to ensure their inclusion into the ambit of social security schemes, maternity benefits, labor protection measures, all of these. And with respect to the to addressing the constrained access to public amenities, really an improved access to facilities at living and work sites and better conditions of work will have a direct impact on women's well-being. Because as I said, it is the women who are absorbing the impact of negligence by the state and the employer. So provision of basic amenities will directly translate into greater well-being for women workers. And there is an urgent need to mainstream women's perspectives and diverse forms of work performed by women in policy design and governance. And the government functionaries really need to be sensitized to the gendered burdens faced by women workers. And lastly, I think women's voice and agency should really assume centrality in various spheres. For example, because I work in the sphere of labor with informal workers, we often see this, that there is a great vacuum of women's leadership in trade unions or in any forms of labor collectives that we see in the public sphere. So women's empowerment and leadership in these public forums will also play an important role in really furthering women's voice and agency and their well-being. Thank you. I'll stop here, and we can take questions now or later.
Thanks a lot, Divya. Thank you for this wonderful presentation, backed by a very solid evidence, bringing out what is the everyday life of women in the informal sector. So it has been, thank you for sharing your study and findings with us. The analysis was simply superb. We will now open for next 10 minutes or so, we'll open for questions in terms of if people have any comments or questions to make. I'm also opening the, apart from the chat box, which can be used for questions, I'm also opening for next 10 minutes the audio and video for everybody. So if anybody wants to ask a question, they can ask a question using audio also, or the chat box, whatever works for you. So please go ahead. Before we invite the other speaker, we'll spend next 10 minutes for the questions, comments, clarifications that you might need on this research. Go ahead and ask questions that you might have. Divya, would you like to respond?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so the question is it a common condition for women that overwhelm the Indian country? Yeah, that's a good question, and I think the answer would be yeah. Unfortunately, I think this is a reality that is shared by a large number of women in the country. Of course, as you can imagine, in a large part of the developing world, I think patriarchy is the norm, and women are still really struggling to break through the shackles. And more so when there is like someone I think has had a subsequent question on intersectionality. So there are so many identities that are intersecting here. There is a gender identity. There is an identity of belonging to a marginalized community that has been historically kind of marginalized, and there is also the identity of being a migrant worker, and not being able to stay back in your own kind of roots, in your own social network where you've grown up, where you know how to navigate the world. But because of economic pressures, they are forced to migrate to the cities and find work in an alien environment. So there are all these different vulnerable identities that are intersecting with each other, that are really layering these experiences and really accentuating the hardships for women. And I think in one way or the other, a lot of women also are at the intersection of multiple identities like this, and that really complicates their experiences very much.
Divya, we have a couple of questions about what are the actual responses that we are seeing from the government, from the NGOs, and from the community itself.
So yeah, that's a really good question. So I think I would like to kind of provide a caveat in the beginning that migration as an issue itself has only very recently assumed, come into the limelight. It's really due to the COVID-related lockdown that migration assumed a lot of policy spotlight. But NGOs like ours, and there are many other organizations across the country who've been working with migrant communities for the past decade or more. So for women women workers, I think, like I said, one of the major sort of interventions that we have are actually mobilizing them into solidarity groups where they can really demand their entitlements from the local city governments. So, for example, in one of the neighborhoods that we work, where women are living, families of migrants are living in an open space, the women groups, solidarity groups, actually approached the city municipal commissioner and demanded mobile toilets and mobile water tankers to come to their settlements. So I think linking them to basic kind of public interventions, basic public provisioning in the cities is a big step in terms of alleviating their day-to-day hardships. And secondly, for example, we are working very hard to link them to the Building and Construction Workers Welfare Board that I talked about. Like I said, it's a landmark legislation in India, and given that a large majority of informal workers work in the construction sites, it is the welfare initiative by the government is actually is very laudatory, and I think the last mile linkages to men and women workers are being enabled by the Labor Department and by community institutions like ours, and we are working very hard to provide maternity benefits to women whose identity as construction workers need to be established, and then their access needs to be facilitated. So these are some of the now of course the government is trying to undertake a national level database of migrant workforce in the country. So that's again a great initiative. So we are hoping that a lot of these things would come together and really make lives better for women workers.
Divya, I would just like to add here. So there were a couple of questions about the response from government at the national level in terms of programs and policies, on which you did share a couple of things. From my experience in working in public administration at ground level for several years, what we have seen that we have some very interesting and powerful programs that we have. For example, we have that Building and Construction Workers Act, which in essence is called a scheme which is cradle to grave kind of thing, meaning by this has provision for the needs of all workers, including women workers, starting from the time they are born to the time at the different levels of education, security, safety, and then finally employment, reskilling. So all these things are there, and they're very, very clearly defined incentives. That is there. Plus, we have something called labor cess. We have 2% of labor cess, which is imposed on most of these contracts programs. That 2% of the money is taken and put into a labor welfare kind of fund, and this has to fund all those schemes. What I see that there is a good scheme. What I also see is that there is funded by it is backed by a funding mechanism. Issue is the last mile issue. What Divya said. How do we ensure that it is implemented in letter and spirit? How do we ensure that it has a coverage which is, let's say, universal? So these are the issues, and these are the issues which we need to address. And the lack of effective implementation and accountability was very evident recently when the COVID induced a lot of movement across the country, and we saw that people were vulnerable. Women were especially vulnerable. So that was where the focus was sharply shifted to this thing. We are hoping that things will improve in time. I also have some very interesting questions coming here. Divya, would you like to respond to a question whereby it says that, well, empowerment is something which is required, and empowerment, can it have a linkage with the young girls? How do we start? Where do we start? And would it help? In what manner? So would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's a great strategy as well. I think all over the development kind of sector, in terms of, programming and in terms of funding, there is even from, multilateral organizations and their thinking, there is a lot of focus now on adolescent girls, because I think the thinking has moved in a direction that says that the right stage to focus on is adolescence. adolescents in terms of both health and skill building and empowering them and giving them social skills so that they can take that with them after marriage. So there is a lot of focus on adolescent girls right now in many development sector organizations across the board with respect to, like I said, like reproductive health, with respect to education, with respect to skilling them, so that that's also then transmitted to the when they have children. Those outcomes, better outcomes, can also then be transmitted to the children as well. So that's a great question, and I think that's a great strategy that is now being realized and implemented in a lot of places across the development sector.
There was also something about one person specifically asked about what about intersectionality? How does it work? How does it work in these spaces? And are there more resource about the concept of intersectionality? Some book, something. So we will request Divya also and our next speaker also to probably expand a bit on this and also share some resources if possible. How does intersectionality comes into play in these spaces?
Sure. Yeah, I'm not a gender specialist, so I will leave it to Geeti ma'am and Manisha ma'am to elaborate more on that. But like I said, at least in practice, we see a lot of intersectionalities between belonging to marginalized communities and their identity as a migrant, identity or as a worker in the informal sector. So a lot of these identities come together to create this compounding of vulnerabilities that women have to experience on a daily basis. So yeah, that's what I would like to say.
Thank you, Divya. I would probably, it's time to move on to the next speaker. What I would just like to say that the one aspect, another very important aspect, which one of the participants pointed out, was the role of community. Generally speaking, we have seen that the community has a very important role in shaping the let's say narrative and ensuring that safety and the common shared sense of, let's say, security, safety and empowerment. But this is one issue which is a problem, which is a handicap for migrant population, because they are uprooted and they are into a very, let's say, different context from their own. That sense of identity and community is not as strong, as supportive as we would like to. And as also Divya mentioned that these collectives have not taken shape in this migrant community. So we may have bodies which are representing different other professions, but not in case of migrant community. So that's something which is probably need to focus on in terms of how do we improve the participation, how do we empower them, encourage them to build a community, because that is where the real empowerment will come. We all can support, but the empowerment has to come from the community also. So on that note, thank you, Divya. It was a wonderful presentation. I would request you to stay on for as long as you can and answer questions, participate, share your thoughts wherever you can. I would like to move to the next speaker now. Geeti Chandra ma'am has joined us. Ma'am, thank you for joining us. Before I invite you for sharing your thought, a couple of words about you and your work. So Geeti Chandra ma'am is based in Reykjavik, Iceland. She's an associate scholar at the United Nations University's Gender Equality Studies. And she's a member of advisory board on Center for Studies in Memory and Literature at University of Iceland. She has studied from St. Stephen's from Delhi University, that is just across my college, which is Hindu College. So great to connect with you. She has worked on the issue of gender for quite a long time. Her doctoral work was on women's narrative of violence and collective identities. That is something which is which invokes very strong, let's say, reactions, responses, and very emotive, I would say, as to how it has, let's say, developed over time. And we really look forward to your experiences in this long in this field, ma'am. So over to you. You will have time till around 4:50 or so, and we'll leave it last 5-10 minutes for question and answers and all. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Vidya Bhushan. I'm going to share my screen and yeah, just please tell me if I'm overstepping. I'm going to go through it as quickly as possible.
Sure, ma'am.
Okay, hold on. I want to take this up.
Yes, ma'am. We can see your screen now, ma'am. If you put it
You
on
can
the.
okay. All right.
You,
Let me do it like this.
right.
Yes. All right.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm very, very happy to be here. I've done this once before and I found it an extremely relevant, extremely fruitful, very applaudable exercise, and I'm very happy to be back. So I wanted to talk about intersectionality as a theory and to give not a very theoretical sort of understanding of it, but to see how it works through images, popular perceptions, how we're basically conditioned to think about certain things, gender, race, class, etc. And I want to give a little bit of history because I feel that these are things that if you know how something works, then you can change it. Why do we think of gender and race and class in certain ways, sexuality in certain ways? If we know what the history is, if we know how it works, we can change it. So I'm going to focus more on popular sort of perceptions and the history behind them. Why do we think of things in certain ways? But just to begin, so Kimberly Crenshaw is credited with coining the term intersectionality. She is a lawyer, she's American, and this is a very quick and easy sort of definition of intersectionality that, of course, Divya has been talking about in practical terms so well. But I want to point to the fact that she says that these are ideological instruments through which power and disadvantage are expressed and legitimized. And what I want to focus on today is the ways in which these appear to us to be legitimate, to be rational, to be things that we don't really question. And I want to just share how that perception has come into being. And how easy it is, in fact, to question it and to delegitimize these things. So here, behind intersectionality, or how these things get, how power is used as an instrument of discrimination, it's good to think about alterity. And alterity, for those of you who are not, haven't studied these things or whatever, and are professionals in your field, alterity is simply a system of creating us and them, so that I define myself not by who I am, but by who I am not. And so I create my other, the them, and I define them as everything I'm not. So you can see how I've got race, class, and gender. But you can see how in the us and them, I have put the them as everyone who, let's say, the white colonizer, or men in a gender system, or rich people as against working class people in a class system. The identifications are made on two sets of lies, right? So the them is not actually everything that is shown over here. I can't see my whole screen. Let me see if I can move this here. Okay. So, when let's say when the colonizer comes to Asia and to Africa and so on, they define the native as someone who is, first of all, black and colored, as against white. And so therefore immediately white becomes a superior thing, black and colored becomes inferior. They defined the native, the colonized native, as being passionate, spiritual, primitive, subhuman. We know that this was part of colonial theory, that the other races are not as advanced as the white races. The religion becomes pagan or heathen as against Christian, and so on. But we can also see how this works in terms of gender. So the man becomes the one with reason, who's scientific, who's progressive, who's, he's the adult, and so on. The woman becomes spiritual, primitive, passionate, childlike. We can see how this works in terms of class. where the aristocracy traditionally saw itself as being, scientific, rational, progressive, whereas the working class became passionate, given to rioting, given to mobs, mob behavior, not understanding, things properly, reacting passionately, and so on. And so I think what's important for us is to see how this vision, this image of the other has been built up and how it has been allowed to survive. So I'll come later to what are the actual effects of this. I mean, women are thought to be emotional rather than rational. So then they should not do science, they should do English literature instead. Or that the woman is a child, she's not able to make her own decisions. Why we should ask her parents first before she gets married, even if she's 21 years old, and so on. And of course, in terms of race, we know that racism is alive and well, and whether it is in terms of color or in terms of race. So all of these things are alive and well in our society today, sadly. And what I wanted to do was to just show how all of these, race, class, and gender, all share this system of alterity in setting up, the us and them, the discrimination and power. So, gender is also, men are also genders. This is something that I find I have to keep saying again and again, because if I hold a course on gender and something, then only the women take it, because the men clearly don't think that they're a gender. But the ways in which the image of the man has been set up for us by the powerful. And I think what I want to focus on a little bit is the history of how men and women of different races and different countries have been produced as images for ourselves, for our own consumption by other people. And so this idea of the inhumanly powerful African man that has come to us through, American and European slavery, who is both a child and incapable of understanding important and scientific things, but also the Uberman. He's a predator, he's animalistic, he's always lustful of white women, he's a savage, he's violent. And you can see how this is still an image that runs through various racist policies and through various kinds of state violence, especially in America and in parts of Europe that have a history of slavery. And at the same time, it produces the Asian man as submissive and sentimental and meek and also sly. They never tell the truth. It's not the stiff upper-lipped British man who's always fair and just and honest, but the native man is not to be trusted, is very devious, and so on. And I think that these are the history of this, the emasculated, effeminate Asian male and the inhumanly powerful African man. And how both, regardless of whether they're inhumanly powerful or effeminate, are still treated like children by the aristocracy, by people with money, by people with power, and of course by white races in various ways. And of course, I'm just taking these examples. There are many more, but we can see how the history of slavery and colonialism and imperialism is alive and well in the perceptions of gender that we still are functioning with. So it's not that the white male body has escaped this kind of history. And I don't know how many of you are following the sort of white supremacist movement that is taking place all over the America and parts of Europe and so on. This idea that the white male is the most powerful. And what's interesting is that as you can see on the image on your left, the Nordmen, the Nordic men, behind the Nazi soldier is the Viking. And these symbols that have been taken from white supremacy, the ring with the Nazi symbol and the image of Thor, the Nordic god, and this one in the middle, which is a sort of bikers, association, and it's Viking. This idea that the Viking is the whitest of the white, and therefore the white man wants to. That is their sort of what's the word for it? Their model, their role model. And there is a fetishization of the white male body as well. It is also misused, but it is misused in order to draw power to itself, unlike the black and the brown male body, which is, produced by white men as being savage, childlike, etc. Women, of course, have been produced in various ways. And I think the thing to remember is that these are images made by the powerful that we, the not powerful, also consume. They're made for us. So as long as the white man, the colonizer, slaver, could produce these images and the white woman would accept them, the African woman, the Indian, Asian woman, really, these were images given to us. This is who you are. And they continue to circulate in popular culture in ways that we can't control. So the image that is on top right is from Hollywood. It's an old movie of Around the World in 80 Days. And there is, how the Indian woman needs to be saved from the Indian man by the white man. So the heroine is a woman who's being forced to commit sati, and then the white man comes and saves her from the cruel Indian man and takes her off. Or she's presented as a courtesan, sensual, sexy, always enticing and seducing men. Or you can see, this is the image at the bottom, black and white image is from Gone with the Wind, where the African woman is produced as this mother, nurturing, she's there to care for you, and so on. She's your governess, she's your housemaid, and so on. And we know that the truth, of course, is that the image up on the top left is of Sally Hemings, who was a slave of, what's his name? Jefferson, one of the presidents of America, who had many children by her. And the idea that the black woman could be both an object of desire, as Sally Hemings clearly was, for her master, or simply this asexual, very motherly figure, as you can see in the Mammy figure here. The images could be contradictory, but all of them exemplify the way in which power works. The person who has the power to produce images of the woman, that person is then able to legislate, if you like, how, or to decide how you will be seen, not just in that own time, but as we can see 200 years later. Much of this is still true. We still see women as either objects of desire or people who should be nurturing us and mothering us, or people who need to be saved. This is because images of women are created by men. So you can be the concubine, the damsel in distress, the slave factory, because we know that black women, African women were prized because they produced more slaves. If you were born into slavery, then you ended up a slave also, and so on. I'm taking resort to American third wave feminism, although this idea is available everywhere, and various feminisms around the world, including in India and Asia and in parts of Africa, have come up with the same idea. But Bell Hooks is simply a very well-known feminist, and I really liked the way in which she shows us how gender intersects with class, and of course, in our case, in India, with caste. So what she says of white women and African women, African American women, it can be used for talking about upper class or upper middle class women in India and domestic labor, poorer women, or people from different castes. And what's interesting here, I think, in terms also of policy of various kinds, is that urban design follows these power discriminations. So what she's talking about, what Bell Hooks is talking about here, is the way in which a town was divided by the railway tracks. And so this is something that many of you may be familiar with, the idea that you come from the wrong side of the track. So on one side of the railway tracks was the white and rich community. On the other side was the African-American and poor community. And the African-American poor community would cross the tracks and come into the white part of the city to work in the services sectors of various kinds, and then go back there. So as she says, you know, across those tracks was a world we could work in as maids, as janitors, as prostitutes, as long as it was in a service capacity. We couldn't live there. And we know, you know, for instance, I've lived in Delhi and Gurgaon all my life before I came here. And we know that there are entire villages, you know, from or slum settlements or whatever, that urban architecture is still very similar in the way in which we have a line and the service sector lives there and we live in our gated communities over here. So our manual scavengers will come from there, our domestic help will come from there. And when we have, you know, some very public event or a foreign dignitary, it's actually easy to build a wall so that no one can see these people. You know, we've seen this in over various, you know, occasions. In the last at least 20, 30 years that I've been living in Delhi, that, you know, there's a public dignitary is coming, we'll put up these big billboards, and then you just can't see these people. It's that easy. So just to think of policy also in terms of urban architecture and how we create these physical divisions between different classes and castes of people. So I think here, Bell Hooks is saying something much more radical. She says that Betty Friedan, who's an older feminist, she says we can no longer ignore that voice within women that says, I want something more than my husband and my children and my house. And this is a career. And she says, but who is going to take care of your husband and your children and your house when you are going off to emancipate yourself? Now I know as a upper middle class woman in India, I know that it was really difficult for me to continue to, you know, be a career person, have a job, for my husband to be working, and for us to look after our children ourselves and to make our own meals ourselves and to clean our own house ourselves. I know how hard that was, and most people will have you know, someone to come in and help clean, someone to cook, someone to look after the children, a driver to take the children to their various classes, and, you know, so on and so forth. And we, what Bell Hooks is saying is that when you look at intersections of class with gender, then, and in our case with class and caste with gender, then the emancipated woman comes at the cost of enslaving other women. So when I go out and I'm a free woman, I'm independent, I have a career, there is somebody else who is doing the labor that is basically mine, looking after my children, my house. And those people are not considered career women. Those people don't have the same kind of notion of emancipation that clearly I am looking for. And she says, Bell Hooks, she says that until we see everybody and everything as intersectional, until everyone is set free or independent, nobody will be independent. So that feminism is, or intersectionality is not just for women and is not just for, you know, migrant laborers. Until you can exist in a world that is based on systems of equality, nobody is going to be equal. So it's a very radical notion of feminism or intersectionality. It seeks to change the world, not just my situation or the situation of women or whatever it is, but until the whole world is egalitarian, nobody in fact will be free. My freedom always comes at the price of somebody else's freedom. I thought intersectionality is very interesting when we look at nationalism. And you think how, you know, very often the word nationalism is used in different ways. And we often, I'm trying to move this thing so I can see my screen. Sorry. Just a minute. I'm just going to try and move this here so I can see this. There we go. Okay. How is nationalism gendered? So before that, I want to see how is nationalism different from patriotism, national pride, cultural identity, collective identity, because these are very often seen as interchangeable. So one of the very simple ways to see this is to look at patriotism, for instance, is not nationalism. Patriotism is about your allegiance to your country, right? The willingness to sacrifice yourself to for your country. Many people often define nationalism and patriotism as nationalism is being willing to kill other people for your country, and patriotism is being willing to die for your own country. National pride is something else. For instance, when the cricket team wins, this is national pride. The whole country feels pride in the achievement of one part of that country. That is national pride. If in sports, in cultural things, and so on, the sense of pride that the whole nation will take in one unit of it achieving something, that is national pride. Is very different from patriotism or nationalism. Cultural identity is different. Cultural identity can be the clothes you wear, the food you eat, the songs you sing, the language you speak. These are cultural identities. And we all know that, in a country as diverse as India, and, in a region as diverse as Asia, and so on, cultural identity can be very small, very specific in the way that my family, performs a certain puja at a certain time of the year, or it can be much bigger. How do I wear my sari, for instance? I wear it like this, or I wear it with the pallu like this. These are different, cultural things. So that is very different. And I think collective identity is something that we often confuse with cultural. So collective identity can be any kind of collective. If I'm a jogger, I am part of the community of joggers. That is my collective. If I am an economist, I'm part of the community of economists. That is my collective identity. I can be, a part of different collective identities at the same time based on different intersectionalities. And the point of all of this is to show all the ways in which collective identity is a question of intersections. As a human being, all of us have lots of intersecting collective identities that we identify with. I can be a mother, I can be a teacher, I can,
Excuse me, ma'am. Vidya here.
yes,
Ma'am, we have around 9 minutes to go for
okay,
your time.
all
We
right,
would like to keep some time for Q&A also.
yeah,
Sure.
okay. So how is nationalism gendered? There are ways in which, for instance, Russia is a fatherland, India is a motherland. I want to look at what happens when we think of governments and women and women's rights. So we saw, when the Taliban came to power, you saw that the first thing that happened was that women were no longer allowed to go to school. The pictures I have there, you can see from Kabul and from Iran before the fundamentalist regimes came. Here you can see, gun laws that have their effect on women and children, and of course anti-abortion laws. So just to think of these intersections. Nationalism and the cult of purity, we'd see how racism, xenophobia, and sexism all intersect. When we have this cult of purity, so and so white men should only marry white women, not black men, etc. This is something that we all need to think about. And this is it's, I think, something that we should keep in mind, that men define collective identity, but women are culture bearers. How do I see culture bearers? So the woman as culture bearer, our bodies have been inscribed. We, what I do with my hair, it has to do with people who control religion and so on. What I do with my body, what I do with my clothes. The woman, if you want to have fidelity or chastity or caring or community, then your woman has to represent all these things. And this is why we have things like honor killings, because the woman's body is invested with your honor. So if she does something wrong, then you have to kill her. The ways in which the woman's body bears various kinds of culture that she has no control over. Here, I just wanted to say trophy wife. We often don't think of our bodies as political things. But if you're wearing high heels, it's because this idea is of the lady of leisure who doesn't have to walk. and because long legs are sexy. If you're tanned, it's because, you know, you're aristocratic enough to be able to go to the beach for your vacations or to have access to a good gym. So, you know, if you have soft hands, it means that you're a lady of leisure. It means that your husband is rich. If you're prized for being fat, it's because your parents are rich. So in all of these different ways, the woman's body intersects with men's lives. The woman's body becomes a way to showcase a man's various, you know, power things. I wanted to do very quickly on gender and sexuality. And there are various, you know, I've just put here random examples: the temples of Khajuraho, the Kama Sutra, the Ishinpo, which is Japanese, the Lex Cantinia, which is Roman Greek philosophy, which is very ancient also. And the image I have here is of a Nigerian cave painting. It's about 2000 years old. And I just wanted to show how notions of sexuality are, which are so intersected with gender and so on, how recent they are. So the term homosexuality was coined in 1869. It didn't exist before that. You can say, well, the idea existed, but the idea in fact did not. The idea that your sexuality is an identity was something that was very recent. Until the late 19th century, 150 years ago, roughly, this idea that you had to be either heterosexual or homosexual it did in fact not exist anywhere. And so what happened? How have we suddenly come to this? Well, of course, colonization happened. And the intersection of Christianity, colonialism, imperialism, and gender, sexuality is so tightly woven in history that we tend often to forget. So here are the women from Namibia. The upper image is how they dress in naturally because of the climate and of their country. Below is how they dress after colonization, which is the dress of German women. Now you can imagine in that climate how impractical these dresses are. Nevertheless, this is how they dress because the Christian missionary comes in and says, "Ye kya baat hai? How is it that you can wear these things? This is, savage, and you must dress like this." And so when Christianity is carried out around the world through colonialism, these notions of 19th century Victorian English prudery are then spread all over the world. So we can think about purity. Why do we need as policy? For instance, immigration laws in England had this virginity clause. You had to be a virgin if you were coming into the country. Where does it come from? And it has very religious roots, the idea that the woman should be pure for some reason or the other. This, I think, is among the most important things for policymakers, which is this idea that women's brains are different from men's brains. And there's a word for it. It's called neurosexism. People who are neurologists have insisted for a long time and continue to that there is no difference between a man's brain and a woman's brain. But the idea that you are hardwired for something, that men are naturally better at math and science, women are better at multitasking, all of this is a question of environment, the way that you are raised. You are raised to think that women can do everything at the same time, and so on. And so you're forced to do it. You're forced to look after your children and write your PhD at the same time. This is what you have to do. So this gender and science, this is very important. Why are women not in STEM? Why do women not take science and technology and math and engineering? And so on. This, I think, is a very, very important intersection here. I've been doing a lot of work on the Me Too movement. Lately, I've edited the Routledge Handbook of the Me Too movement. And so if we see in terms of policy and in terms of how we interact with how we confront these things, you see how the woman has two terms. You can be a victim or you can be a survivor. Whereas for the man, the perpetrator, there are hundreds of terms. He can be anything because we look at him as a human being, as a complete human being. We look at the woman only as someone who is assaulted. And so, yes, the revolution will be intersection or it will be nothing at all. If we want to talk about gender and equality, we have to think intersectionally. Otherwise, we're not thinking about anything. So that's my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Geeti, for this very insightful presentation, tracing the history, the culture, the forms of governance, the notions of nationalism, how gender permeates all walks of the woman's life in terms of the dressing and in terms of how she is expected to behave, how it changes also the whole way to look at it. So with that, I will request our participants to send their comments, questions in the comment box. We'll not able to take many questions because we are running slightly late, not late, but we'll be happy to have your questions or comments. Please. Ma'am, we will also request you to share your presentation with us so that we can share with all the participants.
Sure. I see lots of thank yous, but no questions.
Yeah, we can see a lot of people thanking you for your presentation. Right? It's beautiful images in the presentation. It's very well illustrated, and it covered the subtle nuances of the whole notions that we have.
Yeah,
Wonderfully done.
I think, there are ways in which intersections sort of end up as law. So this idea of the sodomy law, as it's called in England, they have themselves got rid of it. But we in India, for instance, we have inherited this as part of the British Penal Code. And it is, so when people say that it is un-Indian to be gay, for instance, then you're not looking past the history of the 19th century. Before the British came and told us who we were or what we should be, we were very different people. If you look at our temples and you look at our texts and you look at our shastras, we were very different people. When it came to sexuality, we were very much more fluid, very much more liberated. Then we were told by the British what we should be. And now we think it's not Indian. So this nationalism and law and sexuality have all come together in ways that we don't really question.
Wonderful. So I will just add one thing here, that this notion of gender being a fluid concept, and this notion of lack of binaries in gender, that's something which is being talked about now, but it's not that it has not existed. If we look at the language, the culture, the art, the history, which probably has been reshaped many times over by different forces, including colonialism and all.
Mm-hmm.
But it's something which is there, but we probably ignore it in terms of our policies. We ignore it in terms of our discussions. We ignore it in so many ways. I was reading a book about the two famous painters of Italy from the Renaissance time, and it said that both of them were gay, but then they came across very differently to society, and they also embrace this identity in a very different manner. Yeah. So how do we embrace these identities? How the society responds to it and how we respond to it? That's something which needs attention. I have a couple of one question. They're saying that what are the factors? Sneha asks, how are the factors which are encouraging women to be self-independent? What are those factors which probably will lead to maybe independence? If that is the question, if I get correctly, would you like to address that, ma'am?
What are the factors that influence women to be independent? Is that the question?
Yeah.
I think if we look at it intersectionally, then we have to think in terms, first of all, of gender. This idea that women are made different, this idea that women should, that you have a domestic sphere. It's part of this Victorian notion of, the man's sphere is in the factory and the woman's sphere is at home. And so a lot of our notions of independence come from the idea that men are different from women. And the minute that you get rid of that idea, then there is no question of how should women be independent. It's how should anyone be independent? How is a man independent? A man goes out and gets a job. A man is free to think what he wants. A man is free to wear what he wants. But the minute that we see that men and women are different, then we start thinking, what should a woman do? Why should a woman do anything that's different from what a man does? We don't ask, how should a man be independent? So I think in that sense, it's if we think why we are asking this question, we're asking this question because we assume that men and women are different. Why do we think they're different? A lot of it is religious texts, a lot of it is cultural texts, a lot of it is tradition, a lot of it is Victorian prudery coming from colonization. Where do these ideas come from? And that's why I focused on that, to say if we can understand where it comes from, then we can also, refuse to accept it.
So we will stop there in terms of questions and probably try to move to the next speaker. But before I do that, I must also say that these identities are kind of, let's say, shaped, and it is kind of presented and defined over time. And we try to compartmentalize for the sake of our own convenience. However, I must say that fluidity of identity is something, independence to define my own identity. That's something which is there and which should be there for all individuals, women,
Absolutely.
men, people who are transgenders, Asian, American, all these race, caste, all these identities are something that we have imposed. We are trying to differentiate people on different boundary lines that we probably like to draw. But that is not the case actually. And when we start looking at the futility of these lines, probably that's where some thinking starts. So with those words, thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot for sharing your insight. We would now move to our last speaker for the day. Dr. Manisha, thank you for joining us. I would give a very small introduction for Dr. Manisha Priyam. Dr. Manisha Priyam has a doctorate from London School of Economics and Political Science. She is currently the Associate Professor at the Department of Education Policy, National University of Educational Planning and Administration, which is India's leading policy advisory body for the Ministry of Human Resource Development. She has a very long experience of working with policymakers, administrators, and different stakeholders in policy formulation, implementation, and evaluation. She's done a lot of research work in many areas, which includes education, decentralization, urban social policy. She has been writing for many of our leading national newspapers and weeklies in Hindi and English. And she has been contributing a lot. She has some seminal thoughts. She has been sharing by way of many writings of her. So with those few words, may I invite you, ma'am, for sharing your thought. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Vidyaji. That's a very generous introduction. I'd also like to thank the co-panelists who set the stage so very well just before I come in. And this is close to sunset time in India. And I can see you've been given a visual feast by panelists who've come before me. And I just have words scribbled on PowerPoints and a host of ideas on gender and development programs. So you'll have to bear with me patiently because I'm simply not creative enough. But what I do have is some experience of work with governance programs on women in development, but also looking at the arena of women in representation at the bottommost layers, which is a third layer of democracy, what has been referred to worldwide as a wave of democratization through this third layer. In India, this is known as the Panchayat Raj. So in India's complex federal system, we have the center and the state, but we also have a constitutionally mandated third layer. So what I'm going to present before you comes from my experience of having worked with governance and development programs, but also increasingly interacting directly with women who are considered beneficiaries of such programs, increasingly, interacting directly with the ground below. So not just the upstream effects of policy making, but the downstream effects of what policy does to the lives of women for whom such policies are intended. So these are my basket of experiences based on which I'm going to do a few things. I'm actually going to do just 3 things I'm going to talk to you about gender power and development, socioeconomic development, how the conceptualization itself is very, very important. Then I'm going to share with you something that is based out of Latin American recent programs on governance, on social protection, where women were put at the center. And then I'm going to finally conclude by sharing some thoughts on what's happening with what I just said about women at the ground in India, the beneficiary level, who are the recipients of these development programs. So there are three baskets of thoughts that I just said: the governance idea, then looking at some Latin American experiences, and then coming to the ground in India. Next time around, I'm going to make sure that I have enough photographs. But for this time, just bear with me as I open up each of these bundles for you. And I will do so well in time for you to be able to raise some questions also. Now, on the structure of the presentation itself, as I just told you, this is what we're going to do. Now, I'm going to the second part and tell you that.
Ma'am, may I request you to switch on the slideshow mode, ma'am, so that it becomes slightly more visible. Right, ma'am. Thank you.
Is it on the slideshow mode?
Oh, no, you have to click on from beginning or from current slide. Yeah, from current slide or from beginning, whatever suits. Yeah, now it is there. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. So when we come to gender in development, women in development, three aspects are important. First is representation, making the gender issue visible. Now, many of us may not think very high of politics, but making women visible is an important aspect of gender in development. Second is the issue of vulnerability. Unless we understand the complex ways in which women are made vulnerable, Divya Verma gave you a very good example of the toilets, and I will give you two. Unless we understand the specificities of women's vulnerability, we won't be able to understand the asymmetric lens with which you need to understand where women are located in order to be able to frame social development programs. Now, the third aspect, the second and the third are very, very related. The third aspect is the aspect of care. And surprisingly, the same state that builds dams, the same state that builds powerhouses, the same state that funds projects that can take human beings to the space or invest money in defense, also has to take the responsibility. Vidyaji made the mention of the Building and Construction Workers Act and the boards that have to be set up. Perhaps he will share a little more about it. But the fact is that the Indian state has, despite its many weaknesses and failings and shortcomings as a post-colonial and a rather poor country, post-colonial state and poor country, the visualization of the building and construction workers cells, for example, very, very important. It represents that the state does not just do defense, but the state can also extend itself to the ethic of care. What can we do when the state fails, when policies fail? The faith is still in the state to be able to provide. The responsibility of the state as a provider of care extends more than simply a compact of the state with the people. It is a state that understands its people and understands its people with their asymmetries that can extend its hand by way of the ethic of care. Now, these three are very, very important, looking at women in representation, understanding the vulnerability of women. The second one has engaged scholars from around the world. Now, there's been Geeti Chandra who's been talking to you about it. There's bell hooks and intersectionality, the capabilities approach, there's Matha Nasbam. There are a whole lot of feminist scholarships on women in development. Naila Kabir, also at the London School of Economics, where I studied. Now, all of this work keeps going on. And all of this work is simply to understand the aspect of vulnerability. Now, I'm coming now to the first concept that I spoke to you about, the idea of development and gender. Although today we understand that states should have women-focused programs and that women or the idea of gender in development is commonplace, let me tell you that when we became an independent nation around 1945, not just in India, but all over the world, the idea of women in development, the idea of putting gender at the forefront was not a common idea. The idea of development that gained ground around World War II was really the idea of Talcott Parsons, the sociologist, who felt that we should leave behind our ascriptive roles, our village life, our rural life of illiteracy, domination of faith and custom, and we have to move towards becoming a modern society. But this modern society, as noted economist W.W. Rostow spoke about, he spoke about stages of growth. But there's also the sociologist of development, Alex Inkeles. He precisely says that it's about making men modern. So you can see that at this point of time, around 1945 up until 1970s, early 1970s, the idea of putting gender at the forefront, women at the forefront, was not a specific part of the development agenda. Now, Alex Inkeles' notable study studies gentlemen, is about 6,000 of them in many developing countries of Asia and Africa, but it's mostly men. How to instill civic virtues in men? So women were not specific focus of these studies. Now, at this point of time, even political democracy. Now, although India gave the right to vote to women much earlier than many other developed countries also, in our country, women were given the equal rights to vote at the time of independence. But the larger arena of political democracy was also an arena that was associated with institutional forms of modernization. And it was anticipated that once we become modern, we will also become an equal society. We simply need to become modern. Geeti ji, and before that in the prior session, now I do not remember the name of the lady who was presenting, they were all presenting the idea of the native becoming modern, the colonizer, when he becomes modern. Next time around, I'll get you some pictures and show you that there are cartoons done by Gaganendranath Tagore, and the title of that cartoon is Vidyar Karkhana, which means if you go to a modern university, from a dhoti-clad traditional man, you will turn out to becoming a man wearing a suit, a tie in his neck, and you will become an individual who's modern. Now, all these perspectives were not just colonial, they were male-oriented. They were stories of grand plans of modernization, but they did not have a focus on gender at all. By the 1970s, there was a sharp critique of the absence of women in development, and there was a no real nudge. Just because we wear a suit and a tie and we believe in manners that we borrow from our colonial masters does not mean that we've become a society that is a society of equal. Become farmers, scientists, lawyers, heads of states, and it doesn't mean that women have become equal. Now, Esther Bothrow, notable economist, but also an economist who used the anthropological methods and did a lot of work on Malthusian population and development in Africa, but also in India. Now, this work in India is very, very important. In 1970 comes out her very important work, Women's Role in Economic Development. And she was trained in comparative study of developing societies. Now, she noticed that the gendered division of labor within the household created a form of autarky, a form of male domination. And she found that what was done in the realm of the private domain, where there was a division of labor such that the women worked more but were not paid for it, that created what Bosrup later said, invisible women, even in the informal economy that Divya has spoken to you about. Now, even in times of COVID, you have seen that it was mostly the men who had migrated, able-bodied men who had migrated to the urban centers, and they were the ones who were going back. Now, the imaginary boundaries of the public and the private, the economy and the family, they persist with women's suppression, invisibility, and informalization of their public roles. My giving you a lecture is a formal and a public role, but I may have scrubbed dishes, cleaned clothes, cleaned the house, looked after the children, looked after the old people, done many of these things in the house, but all these are considered an aspect of the private life of Dr. Manisha Priyam. These are unpaid, less paid, and even very casual. Of course, women predominate in contractual employment. Divya's presentation to you was very, very important. India's figures show very much that most women find employment only in the last category of contractual employment, and the majority of women who find any kind of employment are the ones who have bare levels of literacy. So actually, data shows for India that the more women study, the less likely they are to get a good job. So if you don't study too much and get a contractual employment that is underpaid, that is the best hope that you have as a woman. Therefore, what we see that the private role of the woman in the family is something that is structured in the economy. Poor status in the home, invisibility leads to structured, casual, contractual employment in public arenas. Now, what happens that once we understand that these are the missings, with this premise, policy shift begins to be seen, and gendered inequality is something that is beginning to be accepted by the end of 70s as a policy premise. Discussions on gender stereotypes, inequality, and violence become very, very open. And I was so impressed with Vidyaji here. I think he knew the conceptual categories of gender in such detail and in such nuance without ever looking down. You know, when he was doing the managing of this panel in an online format, which is not easy, I could see he's conversant with the terminology. And that, I would say, is almost 3-4 decades of prior experience saying that discussions on gender need to become center stage for discussing policy. In India, by 1992, we have a full-fledged National Commission for Women, which has a statutory and constitutional status. There are overt efforts at women's education, rights discussions, and administrative sensitization. But more than everything else, there's a definite attempt at women-centered development initiatives. Now, on the representation front, forget what's written in the slide. I would say that we haven't, yes, of course, we have women in our parliament and in our legislative assemblies. Women in our parliament speak. In the legislative assemblies, I think the voice of women in the states is not making a major development. At this point of time, out of the major states in India, out of the 25 major states in India, none are actually women chief ministers, barring the state of West Bengal. Now, it's not just about being a chief minister, it's about the, the voice of women. The level where the voice of women is making a difference in India is the third level, the level of the panchayat, whereas there is also a reservation of quotas for women's representation. So at the grassroots, there is a lot of difference being made. I'm not saying the world is changing, but I'm definitely saying that the ground is shaking below our feet because women are asserting themselves at the third level of India's representation, which is the panchayats, which is a grassroots democracy, and which happens through direct elections. And almost every year, we have a couple of states where the state election commissions lead these elections, and you find women coming into their own through a new level of leadership. Now, until 1990s, when we look at development programs, we find that women and child programs were bundled together. Now, that needs to be taken up a bit because mainstream economic programs, mainstream wage programs, social development programs need to put women at the forefront, and not just those that put women and child together. Now, we also see that by the 1990s, participation in education increases, definitely by 2000. Gender gaps have been closed in school participation rates. Women have also been closing up the gender gap of participation in higher education, though the overall participation rates are still not very high. But what we are still not able to see is all this educational achievement translating into effective professional representation for women, especially in leadership roles. If you look at the prestigious Indian Institutes of Technology, I think none of the IITs have a woman head. The IIMs, I think one has a woman head, but not a great or stellar history of women leaders. So what we find is that there is a broken pipeline of ascendance. Now, I would share a piece that I've done for Brookings India. It's a volume on gender inequality. And I have asked the question, broken pipelines or fields of power? Why is it that women, even if they study, even if they get recruited, do not rise up the ladder to take up leadership roles? And there I think we need to understand that the invisibility of women, even when they have been taken into formal roles, they do not systematically find them progressing up the career ladder, then we have to investigate all these fields as fields of power. Now, I'm going to now stop the conceptual part and take just a quick couple of minutes before I leave the floor to you for questions. I know we are supposed to stop at about 5:20, 25 so that you have enough time for questions. But I'm bringing you to the arena of Latin America and Brazil. Now, these are countries that became independent much later than India did, almost 3 to 4 decades later, and had spells of authoritarian rule in each one of them. A lot of poverty, but massive inequality structures these societies. Now, in the 2000s, many of these societies, to break the chain of poverty, they said, to break poverty, we need to address it through gender as a lens. And I think that was an explicit admission that poverty is not simply about the economic variable of consumption. It is about a structure of power. And if you handle the asymmetries of power, put women at the forefront, you will be able to tackle what seems to be an economic phenomena. So an economic phenomena of poverty is addressed by the LACs and Brazil through the lens of putting gender first and gender inequality first. Women at the grassroots became the nodes for development delivery and institutional access for health and education. This happened both in Brazil and in Mexico through their notable programs, the Bolsa Familia, put together by President Lula, and the Progresa in Mexico. Now, while these programs are known as conditional cash transfer programs, we can have a lot of debate about whether these programs are right-leaning, whether they only transfer cash. I have spent a lot of time studying these programs, and I think the most notable aspect of the Bolsa Familia in Brazil is that women head of households become responsible for the social development programs materializing on the ground. And secondly, the state realizes that to extend the ethic of care, they need to be in contact with the woman head of the household. So for example, let me give you a simple example here, that if a child is not able to attend school, what does the state do? The state does not penalize the family for not sending the child. The state says that the child must be in such vulnerable situation that we need to reach out to the women head of the household. So women as head become a downward node for the state. It builds a top and bottom link in a meaningful way. Institutional provision of health and education infrastructure is also strong at the grassroots level, but women heads of household become very, very important link nodes for these social development programs. And therefore, even in India, we have the ASHA workers, the Anganwadi workers. Rather than simply looking at them as nodes for the women and child development programs, they need to be brought out upfront as the last mile of the state, but doing the very important delivery work for our social development programs. Now, the Bolsa and Progresa built up a strong cadre, it's a wrong spelling, of field level workers, and these are similar to the ASHA and Anganwadi women workers in India. Now, in 2009, we went to meet Santiago Levy, the former Mexico finance minister, and he is now the vice chair of the IADB Development Bank. He knew his women field workers by name. They had the courage from Mexico to be able to walk up to his office in Washington and open the doors. So women are the hands and feet of the local state. They build direct administrative relationships and links with them, pro-poor good governance models, put women up front, attendance at health centers and schools can be monitored. Absence or missing women, both are a case of the state being asked to provide more. Now, women demand development in India, roads, schools on cycle in Bihar, girls going to schools on cycles, water for daily needs in Jharkhand by the Panchayat women there. They demand water, saying we need this to have a daily bath, to wash our clothes. And these are the Panchayat member women. They do not feel ashamed to ask publicly for water needs. Now, in Sangam Vihar and Delhi urban slums, women at the local level ask for water, but also for toilets in secure ways. Women voice their demands and say that we need the shelter and seclusion of a private toilet to be able to bathe in privacy. And many women take me to the publicly provided toilets in the field sites and tell me, see, can you see the tin shelter? there are small holes in it. And when we go to have a bath there, especially at night, men can come and peep in these holes. And therefore, women tell me that when they go to have a bath by night or use the toilets, they have to go in a group so that 3-4 are standing outside while women can use the toilets in peace. So in a sense, I find that putting women at the forefront has led to a nuancing, a fine-grained demand being made on the state. And therefore, in the first slide I had told you, understanding vulnerability is not something that you can do sitting in universities. A lot of field understanding of what's happening to gender on the ground is really required. Any case, any instance of absence or missing women is a case conceptually of trying to understand the issue of women vulnerabilities and the state. The greater recognition by the state of vulnerabilities of women are missing at this point of time. The state needs to address the vulnerabilities of the poor, putting women at the forefront. But most importantly, an ethic of care is something that needs to be explicitly adopted by the state if women are to be the front and center of development programs. So I'll just stop here and leave it open for you to ask questions and ask our esteemed moderator to give me the questions so that I can answer them.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for this wonderful session. And you really went through all the aspects of public policy and how it is kind of ignoring, not acknowledging, hesitantly acting at times, and what are the impacts on it. So we have around 5 minutes or so, 5-7 minutes for asking questions, comments, etc. Participants, you have been a wonderful participant today. I've been seeing all the comments that you have been coming, and I invite questions or comments that you may have for our panelist here. While questions come, I have just shared a couple of links in the chat box. One is the benefits that ma'am was saying, that what are those benefits that we give to building and construction workers. So that's a website link from Government of Maharashtra. It's a very lucidly presented different benefits that are that the workers are eligible for. So you may like to go through it. This is just one state. So different states have slightly different set of benefits that they are providing, extending to the workers. But I would rest my case by saying that the issues are in implementation. The devil lies in details.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. So next time around, I can bring pictures from Sangam Vihar, since I can see a lot of thank yous here. But I think the building and construction workers, we are having a dialogue with many scholars and policymakers around the world who feel very stressed with what happened to migrant labor in India. And I always argue the case that, we have complaints with the state, but the hope is still the state, because the site for claims making in India is the state. And I feel that the ministries of social justice and welfare in state governments, and especially this building and construction workers cell that Vidyaji is talking about, they need to come up and become far more significant actors and realize that Divya was talking about this thing about couple labor. In Maharashtra, it's referred to as the Goita, coming together. Now, once the Goita comes, the women is mostly always carrying some children also. So if the woman migrates, she migrates with the burden of the household on her head. And we will find in many construction sites that women have tied a little swing for their little child. And while the child is in that little jhula in the tree or hammock in the tree, she is doing her day's labor. So she migrates with all the burdens of the world on her head. And I think giving greater visibility to women labor, that would be very, very important. Eri has raised her hand. There's some question. Eri, did you have a question? Eri, would you like to ask?
I can see a lot of thank yous for you, ma'am. I think it has been a very good session.
Thank you.
I can also see some interesting comments from one from Noemi from Nicaragua, who explains as to how it has taken shape in terms of representation over there. So that's another area that we will be exploring tomorrow in terms of how it is kind of shaping the whole governance and the legal landscape in terms of entitlements, in terms of safeguards, in terms of criminal justice system. So all the issues we will be addressing tomorrow. But I must say that this economic or the developmental perspective to look at women empowerment, that's key to getting success in this area. We look at the entitlement route that's there, but unless the women have the financial independence, unless they have the decision making and the source of income, other things will not be, let's say, possible to do in a realistic time frame. So with those words, ma'am, any closing comments before we end, ma'am?
I'd like to say only one thing, that in most of the countries from which we have participants, I think the state needs to take far more seriously the voice of women at the third level of representation, which is the panchayat or democratic decentralization. Even if there are user committees formed for specific programs, I think direct talking to women at that level makes a lot of difference. You have a very clear agenda of vulnerability and governance. So the state coming in to connect with women at the grassroots is really the challenge and also the front line.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. We have one very, very thoughtful and very important question by Rani about the concern that she has on the women who are into commercial sexual exploitation, and the response of the government in terms of probably not considering it as something which is illegal, something which needs to be tackled as a crime, but probably turning a blind eye to it in terms of its economics and linking it with social and economic things. So I know it's a very, very, it's not an easy question to answer, but I will just suffice by saying that we have been working with a couple of very good NGOs. One is URGE, which is working in Goa, and they have long experience in rehabilitation, rescue of women who are in commercial sexual exploitation, and they have done some beautiful work on this. They have highlighted this concern as to how it is a organized kind of industry, and there are interests, pressures which make it happen, which probably try to push this towards towards a narrative which is more economics based in narrative or social narrative, rather it being a criminal activity, yes, as such. So I will not say much because we are already at 5:30. Ma'am, thank you. Thanks a lot for joining us. It has been wonderful with all my three panelists sharing different perspectives on this. I'm extremely thankful to you, ma'am. And I'm extremely thankful to all my participants who have been listening patiently and contributed to the discussion, making it rich by very varied and diverse experiences. We'll meet tomorrow again for a very interesting set of sessions, and we'll take for this conversation. I have just one request to all my participants. There was Google form circulated to capture some of your experiences, some of your thoughts, some of your, let's say, data points also. That has been submitted by around 94 participants. There are more participants in this workshop. So those who have not submitted may submit it by tomorrow morning Indian time, so that we can look at those responses and then work on this. The last thing that I want to say that tomorrow the last session would be where we would like to really leverage the experiences of the participants. So what we would be doing, that we will be sending out a small email today to some of the participants who have shared some very unique experiences from their country, and we will request them to share their experiences in 3-4 minutes each, and that will probably help all of us to learn from it, right? So with those words, have a good day. We take leave and meet tomorrow at 1400 hours Indian time. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I will be sharing all the documents on email as well. Thank you. Thank you, Geeti ma'am. Thank you, Manisha ma'am.